Welcome everybody to round 2 of Saturday Wind Down. Kobus is back with a vengeance. We're still drunk and still having a good time, hopefully. So, Kobus, you've got a hubbly. What are you smoking? Ooh. I just got feedback from the actual video on my YouTube tab.
I got green grape.
Green grape. It's an interesting flavor. Well, I've got Marlboro Beyond Blue. I just decided, fuck it, I'm gonna smoke a bit for this session. Usually when I drink, I have the tendency to smoke a bit. Usually I don't indulge by buying an entire packet, but today, fuck it, we're gonna have a bit of fun and I'm gonna do this. Welcome to our one viewer at this stage, the first minute. Please ask any questions or just say hello. See who the fuck you are. JC! My man. JC McFarlane. JC, if you want to join, feel free to DM me. I'm welcome to loop you in. I've been meaning to actually add you to some of my live shows and feeds. So if you're keen, I'm keen. Get a metric fuck ton of booze ready. And if you don't have any obligations in the next 20 or half an hour or 20 minutes, that's good. I'll add you in. We can have a good chat. For those that don't know, Kobus is expat from South Africa that moved to South Korea about a decade ago. And he's done quite well in South Korea. And been throwing a finger to China and North Korea while he's there without pulling any punches.
Yeah, pretty much.
And as you can hear, as per the Korean vibe, teaching in English, built up a pretty impressive American accent. So kudos to you, my friend.
Not by choice, though. Not by choice. By trade.
By trade. There we go. So I take it there, the recommended accent that they're trying to go for is the American one because it's the biggest market.
North American.
Yes, not South American or Central American accents. I don't give a fuck about those. Those are totally optional.
Hi, man. I got a cousin here, man.
Dione, welcome to the fray.
Hello, everyone.
How's it going?
Oh, okay. Nothing interesting. Hang on. Just adjusting the volume. Those are just my fingers.
And we won't complain. Is that water you're drinking or clean vodka?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any alcohol, so yeah, it's just water. Damn.
We'll accept you regardless.
Oh, thank you. You guys are so gracious.
I know. I want to invite JC as well. I haven't had him on my streams as of yet, but I do appreciate his comments. It's actually one of our bastions in South Africa of good wholehearted news, especially when it comes to our legislation, because he's actually a lawyer as well, but he also breaks a lot of news in the legal areas.
Yeah,
so
no, it's fun to talk to him.
Yeah, he sent that he might be interested, so I'm just waiting for his tweets. So if he DMs me, I'll let him in.
Okay.
How have you been? How's your Saturday been, Dione?
Nothing interesting. Just hanging out with a friend, and yeah, it hasn't been that eventful. How have your weekends been?
Been good. It's been productive. I had a SGM this morning. It's our building's first SGM that we had. It's like an AGM. It's an AGM Lite, and I hosted it on a digital platform, but we weren't able to reach quorum. So that bitch is getting moved to next weekend. So
shit!
Whoever's in the according to legislation, what that means is whoever's in the next meeting, we're going to run with it. So your first one gets cancelled. And in my building, it's minimum attendance is 65. And if you don't reach that, then however many people on the next one, be it 10 or 5, we'll run with it. And
what does it mean? What does it mean, SGM and AGM? What does
I'll
it
have to
mean?
Google it, dude. Like, it's also new to me. It's like it's
You're
the
throwing
annual
around
general
these terms,
meeting.
and I feel like a retard. I don't know what it means. SGM, AGM.
Your building probably has it as well. But
Yeah, man.
probably a
Like,
bit
what
of a
happens in this building? I don't really know. I pay my maintenance, and they do things. I don't know what's going on.
AGM is annual general meeting, and then SGM
Okay.
will be. Let's see. I know BDSM by default, but oh Jesus, here we go. No, it breaks down to engineering and some other stuff on SGM. Hey. Yeah.
But
No,
it's
SGM.
some building. It's some building meeting, right?
Yeah, you're paying levies every month, and then
Yeah.
you have your trustees that takes part in it, and then you have the actual people that's in the building. They also attend these meetings, and they get to vote on what's next. Are we going green? Are we breaking away from ESCOM? Are we?
It's like a building meeting.
Yeah. So you probably have one as well. You just don't. You're just fucking completely ignorant of it, eh?
Probably. Probably.
You're like, well, in Korea, shit is so well run. I don't have to attend this motherfucking meeting. In South Africa, we have to fight for everything that we have, right? We have to actually say, like, cool. I have to comply to getting good governance or anything out of the people that deliver services. And yeah, that's kind of where we are right about now.
Right. Yeah, I am blissfully ignorant of the maintenance of this complex that we live in. The grass.
How many units?
I don't know. I know the total resident count is close to 10,000.
Wow.
I don't know how many units.
We're about 194 units. So, you know, let's call it as it is. Like if it's 2 units per person, excluding families, just you're close to 400. That's it. That's what I know.
We have the building that I live in, 34 floors, 4 apartments per floor. So that is like 120 apartments in the one building. There is at least 60 buildings in the complex. And then we got a neighboring complex that has like 40 buildings, and we share a bridge between the two. Yeah, we got schools and shopping malls and everything in the complex. It's kind of weird. It's like a little town.
Wow. It's cool.
So Kobus, I want you to speak a bit about, if you don't mind, the one time you came back to South Africa and a friend had a game farm and it sounded like the best idea ever to come back, and I think they actually wanted you to get a bit involved in it. If you can just talk us through that experience, I think that'd be great, because that's when I met your wife, Amy, and it was quite fun. So
yeah, that was a wild time, man. Like I was just kicking back in Korea, and Amy and I just started living together, and I got this text message, and the guy from the game farm is like, "Hey man, like a lion just killed a child in one of the camps that they were killing, and we got to rebrand and we got to restructure the whole fucking thing. Like, I would pay your airfare and housing and everything if you come over and like head up the rebranding and the restructuring of the game farm." And I'm like, shit, that's kind of an interesting proposal. So I spoke to my girlfriend at the time, who's my wife now, and I'm like, hey, do you want to live in South Africa for like a year or something while we take care of this game farm, this lion?
Sorry, who's the terrible background noise? Is it you, Kobus?
No, it's not me, man. Like everything's quiet here.
Well, things are quiet here too. So I don't.
Okay, maybe I've got something else on. Okay, go on, Kobus.
And then I told the guy, okay, like, all right, man, like if you pay me X amount of money, like I'm willing to move my life back and come deal with your shit. And he's like, fine, just come on over. And true to his word, he paid me the money that I wanted, and Amy and I moved to Paris. Yeah, and yeah, that is highly annoying, that background noise. But anyway, so we moved to South Africa, and we got back, and we changed the name, and I rebranded the game farm, and
Trying to figure out where that noise is coming from.
it's gone. And we rebranded.
But I'm just gonna mute you while you're not speaking. So sorry.
Well, the only thing I can do is I can try the other headphones, but that's about it. Because
yeah, try that. I'm just gonna mute you for now.
I don't know. There's nothing happening here. It's completely quiet.
And then we rebranded, and everything was good, man. And I'm like, okay, cool. We got to get this place up and running. We got to open this to the public. We got to get this fucking going. And
do you have a YouTube window up by any chance?
No.
Lordy. Okay, cool. Get that other one in because I'm hearing a bit of echo. Okay, cool. I'm letting Dione sort that. Kobus, go on.
And then we got back, and I'm like, hey, there's a lot of irregularities here. Like, this place is not fucking supposed to be open to the public. Like, building regulations and electricity, there's fucking wires everywhere. Some shit is not working. We need to get this on the up and up. And he's like, no, we're not gonna do that. I'm like, hey man, like if you want me to take it, everything needs to be good. Like, I don't want to get behind something that might fucking kill someone. So we gotta get this on the up and up. And we had a big falling out. And he had his top guy. No, he's a businessman in Johannesburg, and this was just one of his properties, one of his side businesses. And he had one of his top guys, like, we had a hearing with the CCMA people, and they wanted to get rid of me after he like got me to come back to South Africa from South Korea. And we had the CCMA hearing, not quite CCMA. It was, they sent someone like I don't know what the fuck she was, not a judge, it was someone. And she had to hear, and then she had to consult with other judges and lawyers, and then have to make a ruling. And they tried to get me fired and shit. So we had our hearing, and in the hearing, I had my say, and all cases against me were dropped, and there was no case against me, and they were wrong, and they had to pay me a X amount of money for my voluntary resignation, which was nice, some money in my back pocket. I could have asked for more if I wanted to, but I didn't want to be a dick. So I just took what I felt I was owed. And I left him and his lion sanctuary to do whatever the fuck he wants to do with it. So I came back, and I realized that people are stuck in 2006, man. Like, when I left, the people that I knew back then are still the same people at the same time.
Sorry. I just want to butt in here. You have to make an important distinction between the farm that you were like looking after, and then the people in Bloemfontein and your friends that you used to know.
He was one of the friends that I used to know from Bloemfontein. He just
okay, great, cool.
He's in the same vein. Like, they were back in 2006, man. The life hasn't evolved. They're still passing around the same groupie that would fuck between friends, and they were still just doing their same shit. And it's the same people from high school and university doing the same type of things. And
to bring Dione up to date, but what we spoke about is, like, you have to have friends that grow with time, right? And what we realized is a lot of the friends that we used to know are still stuck on that 2006 or 2008 level. Even a decade later, you get to meet them in 2018, and they're exactly the same people. Like, they haven't grown in any which way. They still see the world in the same kind of way they did back then. And you meet up with them and you expect more, right? You hang out with them, you talk with them, and it's the same topics. It's the same stuff when you were at school or just in varsity. And they stuck in that paradigm. It's exactly the same shit all over again.
Right, it's home. Like when you went to Canada to do your PhD in philosophy, and you come back and you had this experience of Canada, and you had this experience of meeting people from a different continent with a different view on life, and you educated yourself differently, and you had a different perspective, and then you come back and you meet with someone that is stuck 5 years ago, and they're still talking about the same stuff, the same parties, the same drunk night. And it was that bubble, and it was mind numbing. And I was like, I cannot function properly in this group of people. And it's people that I enjoyed 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that just, they stayed. Nothing evolved, nothing changed. There was no progress. It's the same fat people that's still trying to lose weight.
Yeah, I mean, I have to actually say, though, for me, it was an interesting experience, because when I came back from Canada, because I lived in England for 2 years before that. So when I came back from Canada, even the people that I used to be friends with, that they hadn't stood still, so they had moved, they had developed. But I also realized that even so, because I traveled as much as I did, and I didn't just visit other countries, like I lived in other countries. My perspective was still a lot broader, and like I'm not trying to make it be condescending, but in some ways there are things I had to go through where, for the most part, I only had myself to rely on, because I didn't have any family or friends overseas. So if any problem came up, I was the only one who could sort it out. There wasn't anyone who could help me with it. Did you
feel the lack of introspection with the people that stayed behind, or the people at home, was kind of unbecoming, or a turn off?
Yeah, they also, for me, what I found very immature, I suppose that was maybe it. There, in a ways, I was forced to mature very quickly. And when I came back, I felt that difference. And I think it's also because South Africans tend to always think the grass is greener on the other side. And so they would bitch about South Africa and say, oh, it's so amazing overseas. And I would say to them, it's not really. There are things that are better. There are things that are worse. It depends on what you're looking for. And while I was overseas, I think, for example, Canadians are incredibly arrogant. They think that their country is the best country in the world. They don't know anything about other countries, though. Most of them haven't traveled. They've never lived anywhere else. And they have this, that's also why I didn't want to stay there. They have this incredible self-righteousness that I think even exceeds that of Americans, because they think they're the better version of America. And they're not. They're most of the people there are incredibly bland, not well informed. The stuff they'd say about South Africa and other countries, I would just be like, yeah, but you really don't know anything, do you? You've never really traveled. You don't actually know these things. You've basically just assumed that because so many Canadians just tell you this place is so great, that you just think it is. And so I have to say, from both sides, from coming here and being there, I just realized, I never really wanted to travel so much. It wasn't a goal. I had to do it because I was pursuing my career, and it was what was required. But at the end of the day, I do think that it helped me grow up very fast, and it made me mature in ways I otherwise wouldn't have. So I'm grateful for that. But it also made it the case that I'm already an outlier, And it made it the case for me that after that experience, I felt like even more of an outlier, because now I couldn't even relate to people that I used to be able to relate to, because even those people, I felt that their experience and their perspective was so limited that I found it difficult to engage with them in a way that I felt like I was being fed. And it's not necessarily their fault, because it's not like they haven't done those things. But it wasn't the best feeling. I mean, it just made it even more difficult for me to find people that I can actually connect with and feel nourished by. So yeah,
Yeah, that is definitely one of the things that resonated with me as well. Like, it's not that I felt better than them; I just felt more developed, and they had their own course that they were. I would say trotting on. They were not really pursuing understanding of themselves, because they didn't have to. Everything was known, and everything was comfortable and convenient, even though if they didn't agree with it necessarily, the politics or the violence or the danger environment they found themselves in, they didn't agree with it, but it was natural to them. They didn't have to step outside that. It's not like they had to become a vigilante, or they had to internalize anything. Everything was just life. It was just South Africa. That's how it is, kind of. But once you step out of that, once you have to live somewhere else, there is a different part of you that has to develop to adapt to life where you're not taken care of, where you're not accustomed to the ways things work. Yes. And then coming back and trying to, have a conversation with someone that clearly doesn't understand that, it felt limiting to me.
And when we have people, well, the sort of millennial generation, constantly make an issue about being comfortable, I just find it appalling, because I think of, even in England, the culture is so different in terms of the temperament of the people. And I'm very passionate and outspoken and, a bit too much for people like that. So I had to learn how to, in a lot of ways, to adapt to the culture so that I wouldn't be, so to make my life easier, I had to learn how to control myself. I had to learn how to rein myself in certain ways. And in Canada, it was the same thing, because that again is a different culture. And so I went through so much discomfort for 6 years that discomfort became like, for me, the only normal thing was to be uncomfortable. It was the only thing I knew. And in that regard, it obviously made me a lot stronger, because it meant I could handle almost any discomfort and, deal. And obviously I had bad days where, I just hated everything and life was crap. But that's why when millennials now complain, and if I think of my education and how difficult my education was when I went overseas, in the sense that I had to cope with so many changes and so many new things. And I remember I told Carter the story when I was in England. I was the only, in both degrees, I was the only international person in my cohort. So, and all the people I was with in England, it was like a small group, and they all came from like Cambridge, Oxford, and those places. That was where their previous education was, their undergrad. And when I got there, I could see there was a palpable vibe of Dione is the South African token. So she's basically the person that, we have to have here, because we have to be seen to be helping disadvantaged countries. And so there was massive skepticism around my skill level, because I'm coming from this relatively unknown university in South Africa, and they're just like,
came from the shithole.
Yeah, they're just like, what is she doing here? Like, why is she here?
So they were channeling their inner Margaret Thatcher.
Like the
Commonwealth is shit, and England is superior to all the nations part of the Commonwealth.
They're quite, very impressed with themselves. So anyway, so when we did the first course I did in epistemology, the lecturer, we had to do presentations, and the lecturer then asked us, okay, who's going to go first? And there was the silence, and I usually get really fed up with that sort of thing because I'm like, well, we're here to learn. So why are you guys hesitating to just go first? I mean, you're gonna do it eventually, and that's the point of being here, is that you want to learn. So just fucking put your hand up. So I just was like, okay, fine, I'll go first. I'm like, you guys are such fucking pussies. And then the first presentation I did, was about a very difficult epistemological problem. It's the Putnam's brain in a vat problem. And anyway, and then after that, I went very, very deep into that thing. And after that, none of them ever questioned my place there, because afterwards they came to me and they were like, wow, that was so good. And then they basically then treated me like an equal. But, if I hadn't done that, they would have always considered me I'm just the girl. Also, because I'm a woman, I'm just the girl that's there because we have to be seen to be inclusive and all of this shit. So,
all right, the PE points.
Yeah, and in Canada it was similar because I was the only international student in my cohort. So again, there was this process of, I don't mind that. Look, at the end of the day, I see all of those challenges as ways of developing yourself. And so those are still good experiences, but I'm just saying that I had to deal with such an intense level of discomfort all the time that when these millennials talk about, oh, I have a lecturer who's hard on me, I'm like, are you fucking joking me? Honestly, if your education isn't hard, it's not an education. That's the point of an education, is it's supposed to develop you, and development is not easy. It doesn't feel comfortable.
Do you feel that a lot of the younger generation people internalize a lot of things that's not supposed to be personal? They feel like
Yes.
the example, like you said, the lecture is being hard on me. No, it's just the fucking course is difficult. It's not you.
Exactly.
It's not personal on you. But once you step into the broader context of the world and you realize you're insignificant, it's not you. Life goes beyond you and your comfort. And whether you adapt to it or not, it is irrelevant to the progress of said course or situation. So the same thing in Korea.
Yes.
Life goes on, man. People are they're not picking on me. They're not discounting me because I'm a foreigner. And 99% of everybody here is Asian. It's not that I'm excluded. It's just they don't know anything except them. They don't know anything except that. And I cannot internalize that. If I internalize that, I'm the victim, but I'm not the victim. Those people just live their life, and I'm stepping into the broader stage. So I got to make myself known. I got to put myself out there and just this is me. This is my ideas. I'm confident and comfortable with it. And if you're a charlatan trying to sell snake oil, you're going to be called out on it. You cannot fucking fake your way on the international stage. You can probably fake it at home. You can fake it at home. You can fake it with your friends, and you can call the race card whenever you want because it's comfortable. But if you do that international, they're going to laugh at you. They're going to laugh at you and call you out on your bullshit because that is not relevant in those countries.
But yeah, I'll tell you another story. So I think that the left-leaning ideologies that have taken hold in the academy have cultivated an incredibly narcissistic society where they think they're entitled to everything. And so that has taught them that everything is about them. If they're uncomfortable, they can go and complain and say, I'm uncomfortable, I feel this, I feel that, I think this is, like you're saying, in some sense, aimed at me, when it's really not. It's just that's what's required. And when I was teaching in Canada, I had this student who, this was now the first time, this was a first year course, it's the first time they're doing philosophy ever. And for the first paper, none of them came to consult with me. And I warned them, I said to them, you better come and consult because this is the first paper you've ever written. So, it's a good idea to come and consult with me. And they didn't. And so the one student, she got in the 60s, I think, or actually maybe in the high 50s. Now for Canadians, that's not just that's for them is almost worse than a fail, because for them, basically an 80 is for them the lowest you should get. That's their perspective. So it's like their marking system is completely out of whack. I come from the British education system. So for us, a first is like in the 70s, that's considered still like really good. So anyway, but in any case, the paper was that shit. It's not even about the marking system. But so she came to me and she was in tears and she was like, I've never gotten anything lower than an A. And I said to her, and it's an 80. And I said to her, okay. I said to her, I don't know what that has to do with this situation though. Right. And she's like, well, I don't understand how I could have done so poorly. So I said to her, okay, fine. So we went through the paper in detail, explained to her, look, you're not explaining this. You didn't actually, plug in the gaps in the argument. You're not actually dealing with this objection. And so I explained to her in detail. And she kept arguing with me. And she's like, no, I did though. And then she'd explain it. And I'm like, no, you're missing the point. Like, that's not actually answering the question. And she'd keep arguing with me. So eventually I stopped. I said to her, look, you can keep arguing with me, but at the end of the day, I'm the person who's in charge of grading your papers. So and I'm actually the expert. You've never done philosophy. So let's just accept that you know nothing about philosophy. Right. And I do know what I'm doing.
My first philosophical... No, please continue. Please continue. I thought you were finished.
I'm almost done. And then so then she calmed. Then she started crying. So I said, okay, fine. I understand that you're disappointed. I know it's a knock. But I said to her, consider this. This is the first philosophy paper you've ever written in your life. You didn't come and consult with me once to check that you understood the material. And your expectation is for the very first philosophy paper you write to get an A. Do you think that expectation is reasonable? She's like, yeah, like maybe not. I'm like, no, surely not. So what you need to do now is listen to what I'm saying to you and actually ask me the question so that you understand what you did wrong and stop fighting me because it's not going to change.
Right.
And then for the next paper, come and consult and make sure you actually understand the material and you actually know how to articulate it. I said to her, it's not enough that the paper makes sense to you. It's irrelevant whether it makes sense to you. It has to make sense to me. I'm the marker. That concept for them is like, that blows their mind, this idea that, well, when I read it, it makes sense. I'm like, well, I can't read your mind, can I? So you have to be able to explain it so that I can see that you understand it.
Right. They fill in the gaps that they don't necessarily put on paper.
Exactly. Right. So then she did. So then she did actually come and consult the next time a lot, and she got an A for the next paper. And I'm like, it's not. I said to her, that was a learning curve. So you needed to go through that, and I know it was upsetting, but don't you feel so proud of yourself now for actually, developing yourself to a point where you could now get an A for a paper, legitimately. Right. So yeah.
Yeah, the first philosophy paper I wrote, we had to take a current South African issue and use a historical example to either warn or advocate it. And I chose BEE. I think at that time it was BEE still, or it was BBEEEEEE. I don't know which one it was. It was one of the fucking B's and E's. And I used the similar system that they implemented in India, where they had to employ certain people from a lower caste, and then they would get government aid, and how that diminished the Indian economy and just like fucked up the currency. So I drew parallels between BEE and then the caste system in India, which was implemented like 10 years prior. And I got a 75. I thought I did fucking amazing. I thought 75 was awesome for my first philosophical paper, like drawing parallels between, and I was happy about it. So if someone writes a first philosophical paper and they get like 70 or whatever, that's an achievement, because you know nothing. There was so many, like now if I read it back, like there were so many gaps, like you said, like lapses in argument, and unfinished ideas, because you get halfway through it and you're like, yeah, this fucking makes sense. This is a good argument.
Exactly.
You haven't solidified it yet. You haven't pushed it home yet. You made it to the point. Yeah, you're leading up. Yes, I'm with you. I'm with you. And then you just pull out on the last minute, right?
Exactly.
The pull out technique. And
I'm a professional pull outer. I just want to say that my family thought I'd make someone pregnant by the age of like 21. I'm 33, bitches. I'm still winning. Sorry, just comedic relief. Go on.
Yeah, so that was one of the things that I learned. And then when the next one came around, and he was like, I think I coined the phrase "why the world needs World War III." Like, I got an 85 for that, and I was really happy with it.
That's good.
Yeah,
like I have to say, like, for me, the other lesson that they have to learn when they're learning how to write their papers is that, and it's the thing we always talk about, but I mean, you always do it, is the straw man argument issue.
Right.
So whenever I tell them, okay, look, you have to explain this position, and then you have to critique it. Then I always say to them, but don't set up a straw man. Like, you have to set up the strongest version of that argument. Explain it so well that for a fact you've given me the strongest version of it. And then if you can still object to it, you know that there's something wrong with this argument. But then what they usually do is this. They're like, so they don't really understand how this process works, because then they will set up a straw man, they'll undermine it, and then I'll look at it and I'll go, okay, yeah, but that's not the actual argument though. You've kind of, you haven't actually properly explained it. So then I give it to them, and then they're like, yeah, but I couldn't think of an objection then. I'm like, well, then change your view.
Right.
If you can't think of an objection, then you can't say that this thing is a bad argument. Then just change your view. That blows their minds, that they're like, but I don't think that. I'm like, yeah, but you clearly don't have good reasons why you don't think that, because you can't actually plug holes in the argument.
And equally,
so I'll again, sorry, just to interject. I'm being the devil's advocate here. Give me an example of a weak strawman's argument that you poked so many holes in that felt like a Filipino hooker, Dione. And then let's run with it, because you just said that it's a strawman's argument. Give us a practical example of that, if you don't mind.
Oh boy, that's really putting me on the spot. How am I supposed to think of it? Like,
okay, take 5 minutes to think about it. You and Kobus can do that.
I got a filler. Why you think of that? I got a filler. Like, equally to that is the fallacy of calling to authority. Like, I can support this. So I can support this because President who the fuck ever watermelon head said this. It's like, it doesn't make it true.
One.
Because,
that one. Oh, I hate that one. Hey, yes, that makes me angry. It's like, seriously, fuck off.
Right.
Yeah, the best one these days is definitely the ad hominem fallacy. It's left, right, and center, and people don't think it's a fallacy anymore.
Right.
Jordan. So I'll use the recent example of Jordan Peterson, where he was the publishing company. The employees had a go at the publishing company because they were like, "How dare you publish this book without consulting us?" And then they were like, okay, but why don't you want us to publish this book? And they're like, well, we haven't read it, and that's irrelevant. It's irrelevant what the ideas of the book are. All we know is that Jordan Peterson is popular on the right. So people on the right like him. And what was the other thing they said? It was so freaking, like, made me burn up inside.
And another one is the call to Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci says masks are good. Dr. Fauci says, who the fuck gives anything about Dr. Fauci?
This is the thing. So with Jordan Peterson,
it's like Fauci, Jesus.
So you're basically saying that so it doesn't actually matter what Jordan Peterson's views are. You don't even know what they are, and you haven't actually seen, again, you haven't confronted the strength of his arguments, and they never do. They don't ever confront the strength of Jordan Peterson's arguments. They always go for an ad hominem, and they attack his character and say, well, because he's popular on the right, it must mean his views are flawed. It's like, well, it really doesn't, though. Just because certain people like him, they may be misunderstood. And I do think this happens a lot with Jordan Peterson. Well, he'll get like fans on the right, because they understand his argument in a certain way. And then sometimes they'll contact him and tell him, yeah, like, I really like you because, this argument, etc., etc. And then Jordan Peterson's like, no, that's not what I'm saying. Like, again, you're not understanding the argument. And then he's talked about this, how people on the right will then abandon him and go, well, then fuck you, we don't like you anymore, and all this kind of nonsense.
Right.
So,
A concrete example of that is when he was outspoken against the transgender pronouns, where he said if it becomes law, where the law is changed that I'm forced to use a specific gender pronoun, I'm against it. Not that, and then everybody like on the right, like extreme right, they jumped on like, I'm not going to use gender pronouns, and he's like, no, that's not what I said. Like, if I speak to a transgender person and they're gonna they ask me to call them her or Z or Q or whatever, I will do it. But if the law, the Canadian Constitution forces me to, I'm against it. So they didn't understand the argument, right?
Yes, exactly. And he's not, and in a lot of ways, I've read 12 Rules for Life, and in a lot of ways, he is still quite left-leaning. There are a lot of respects in which he does still actually believe in, he basically still sees the threats of capitalism. And I think that always gets lost in his discourse, because he's trying to basically say that even though capitalism has the flaws it does, it's still the best economic system. That's all he's saying. He's not denying the dangers of capitalism. And that's, again, where people basically, they think, they basically project onto Jordan Peterson whatever they want him to be saying, so that they have a foil against which they can now act. And for me, that was with the publishing house. So you're against some author making you guys a shit ton of money that goes and pays your salary, and it doesn't matter to you what he says in that book. All that matters is that he's popular with the right. That's insane.
Right. Yeah. And another thing is like, oh, he's religious. So because he has some sort of religion, then we have to be against him. Whatever. But you don't know what he said about religion. He talks about the flaws of it, and he talks about they don't do the effort. They don't put in the effort. And I think Rudy Giuliani, like in the past week, it was either the Michigan or the Wisconsin hearings, he said the same thing to one of the people. He said most of the people don't take the time, and he held up the bundle of affidavits and proof, if you want to call it that. And he said most people say there's no proof because they don't take the time, or they're not intelligent enough to read through it and understand it, and then they say no proof. And that's the same with Jordan Peterson. They're either don't take the effort, they don't spend the time to read his book, or they're not intelligent enough to understand his book, and then they want to claim bullshit on it.
Yes, and I think this often happens in the case of,
You finish, and then I'll just jump in, because I want to make the case for capitalism. I listened to something today, and they shoot a lot of people down on arbitrary facts, and then they build the case for socialism. And I just want to kind of give my 5 cents about that. But you guys go on about the current argument, then I'll butt in my own time. Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to answer your issue about the straw man problem. I think it becomes a lot more prevalent, like in the case of Jordan Peterson. When we're talking about political or moral issues, that's when students are much more prone to doing that. Because if we do, for example, applied ethics, it'll be about topics. So even in my first year in Canada, I was a teaching assistant for an applied ethics course. And one of the topics was affirmative action and the BEE stuff. And so the woman found out I was from South Africa. So she actually asked me to come in and talk to the students about whether I think that BEE policy works or not, and why. So I did. I was very honest, and it was the last time you could ever have done that, because that was when they was like really like shutting down that shit about, anti-leftist sentiment. Right. But I had this gap where I was like, okay, yes, I can finally just get in here and say some stuff before they silence me. And I went in there and I did say to them, look, in theory, the idea of affirmative action sounds good. If it's this idea that if you have got two candidates who are equally qualified and equally experienced, you should pick the black candidate for, to make up for the past. But that's not how it ever plays out, ever.
No.
And there are a lot of reasons for that, but this is the thing with applied ethics. That's why it's interesting. It's like, in theory, you can come up with a lot of nice things, but that's not the question. The question is when you actually see it in the real, and this is why communism is a prime example of that. In theory, okay, I think in theory it still sounds like a fucking disaster, but okay, let's give them that. In theory, it sounds like a nice idea, but it's irrelevant whether it sounds like a nice idea, because in reality, it doesn't play out like that. And
in theory, with 10 people, when you can keep an eye on all 10, it makes sense.
Yes.
In a village, it makes sense. In a city, it makes less sense. In a country, it makes no fucking sense.
No sense.
Right.
So exactly. And then what I saw in a lot of the classes then we teach where we do applied ethics and moral theories, if we're talking about something like abortion, students already have their intuitions and they've already made up their mind about what they think. But obviously we're not challenging them to be able to argue that in a paper, and they can hardly ever do it because they don't want to confront the fact that those feelings are just that, they're feelings. They're not grounded in any rational thought, and they haven't actually considered it enough to think what they think. So that's when they do the straw man thing. So that's exactly where they go, oh yeah, abortion is wrong or abortion is fine, and it's because XYZ, and then I come along and I'm like, well, that's a terrible argument, and here's why. And then they're like, that's when they will do that thing. They're like, but then I can't come up with an objection or I can't defend it. I'm like, well, if you can't defend it, then you have to change your position.
Right. So the first thing, like, just to touch on abortion, the first thing you need to do is look at the medicine. Like, you'd have to look at the medical sciences. Like, if you want to go with a heartbeat theory, like, once a heartbeat is, like, when do you exclaim that something is life? Right.
Exactly.
They don't do that. They just say, okay, it's not considered a human until it's born. Okay, but what about like at 6 months, right?
Exactly.
Right. So, but they don't want to confront that. They don't have the time to do the research and look at the background and say, okay, shit. So when a baby is born at 6.5 or 7 months, we can still save it. It's a fully formed human. No, it's not. It's not. So when does it stop being cells, and when does consciousness start? And like, that is the first argument you need to address, I guess.
Yeah, and to talk about the abortion debate, for me, I think I used to be pro-choice, but I started changing my mind about it. And now when I say I'm pro-life, what I mean by that is not that it should be legal to have an abortion, but I don't think it should be legal to have an abortion as late as the Democrats advocate for. I think that's insane. But what I mean by that is, in my own case, I wouldn't have an abortion. But the reason I started thinking differently about it is because I started listening to liberals, or like left-leaning, like extreme leftists, when they would say, if it's a baby they want, so if they're pregnant and it's a baby they actually want, but they have a miscarriage, they'll say, I lost my baby, right? Because they want the baby. So they'll say it's a baby. But if they don't want the baby and they have an abortion, they'll say, I terminated a fetus. And for me, that was for me a very like a very sneaky move there. So basically, it's only a life when you want it to be, and it's not when you don't want it. So when it's an inconvenience to you, it's not a life. And then the other thing that I found out was that when in America, when people go for abortions, they give them a form to fill out where they give them a list of reasons for why they had an abortion. And it includes like anything and everything you can think of, like psychological issues, financial issues, like everything you can think of. And for the most part, most people, they don't tick any of those reasons. So what that tends to indicate is that, okay, maybe people don't want to give their reasons, but at the same time, it seems to me that a lot of people are, because we've become so comfortable with the notion of abortions, that not in this country is still quite conservative, but I'm talking about overseas, that it's not clear to me that they are actually having abortions because they can't have the baby, because there's some massive impediment that's stopping them from being a parent to that baby. So for me, that was also a wake-up call, in the sense that I'm worried that our society is using abortions as a form of contraception, that they've kind of lost this reverence for life because it's become socially acceptable to get rid of it if it's an inconvenience to you. And so for those reasons, I don't know, it just started me thinking about this question in my own case a lot more deeply. And so, but again, people have their views, and it took a long time for me to be able to start thinking, like, you know, even though I'd been pro-choice for so long, am I still pro-choice? Like, have things changed for me? And I think that's also lost in our society, this idea that you can change your mind and change like certain core beliefs over time because you actually are trying to figure out the truth. You're not just trying to have like, you're not just trying to say that you have this opinion and then you want to stick with it because you don't want to look like, you know, you don't want to be compromised in terms of your intellectual image, that you've actually now admitting that maybe you were wrong, that you actually didn't get it right the first time. And I think that for me is also in this day and age, it's fueling this extreme polarization where no one wants to ever admit that, well, maybe I got it wrong. And I've revised my thinking. I don't think that anymore. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, you're supposed to grow and develop. But we don't see a lot of that, unfortunately.
No, we don't. Like, my take on abortion is the sooner the better. Like,
absolutely, yeah. No, absolutely.
Pro-life, pro-choice. I don't know. Like, I don't want to box it like that. But if you don't want to have a kid, right, you should know that, you know, pretty soon. In like 8 months is a bit late.
Kind of, yeah.
3 months,
yeah, exactly.
Maybe that's fine. You know, the sooner, like the sooner the better. And like like when you said it's a form of contraception, that's hitting the nail right on the head. Like, it's condom morning after abortion. Like, it's just another option. And that's kind of, that it's fucked up, but that's reality. That's where we are now. It's just a choice. It's like, okay, like I was lazy. I'll do it in 6 months. You know, procrastinating the termination or whatever. And it's like, fuck. Like, if you don't want to have a kid, just fucking do it. Do it already. Get the morning after pill, or, you know, within the first trimester. Like, you know, you don't want to have a kid.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't know, man. Like, I don't know.
This got real deep. Like, I just had another conversation, and it seems like it escalated real quick. Do you know, just a quick one? And Kobus, I sent you a message. Just retweet this conversation and let's have it online. Just putting it out there.
All right. No, I have to answer your question. I haven't had an abortion.
That's good. You know, it's actually shocking. Like, I've had a lot of conversations with people and even people that I've been involved with, and the answer is quite different. I mean, it depends on a lot of factors, but what I see is people with a very internal locus of control that takes charge of their life, and they don't want anyone else to have agency. They take responsibility. The rest, not so much. Hey, they just go on and get on with it. I'm just like, fuck, is that any way to live one's life? Go.
God, I also think you and I also have talked about this, how shocking it is, because and I've seen a lot of people talk about this, that I'm in my 30s and I have never been married and I've never had a child. And it's so rare now where a man or a woman can get to their 30s and not already have been married and divorced and already have had children with someone else, where that marriage hasn't worked out.
What are you doing with your life?
honestly, I feel like even though I'm not married and I don't have kids, I mean, I feel like I should at least be celebrated for the fact that I didn't go and have a fucked up marriage and had a child with someone that is now compromised because I was in a crap relationship.
Fuck. I had the whole celebration thing. Like I had a big fucking argument with a leftist woke man lady. I don't know what the fuck that was. About celebrating good things. And we were talking about oppression, and I said, if someone is oppressed or they claim to be oppressed, we need to ask why. And if someone is not oppressed, we need to celebrate that. And they said, that's a weird thing to do, to celebrate someone that's not oppressed, that's someone that hasn't faced difficulties. And I'm like, no, if your friend opens a fucking business, you celebrate them. If your friend is successful in their academia, you celebrate them. And they couldn't understand that you want to celebrate someone that's happy and successful, whatever that is, regardless if it's something that you can agree with or understand. Like if someone is 30 and not married and they're happy, celebrate it. If someone is 25, have a kid, celebrate it. If they're fucking happy, celebrate the good things in the people's life. And I had a big argument with this leftist lady man about celebrating.
This is where I interject, and this is where I actually tell my story, then what I had my experience in today. So I listened to a podcast about PragerU, where the topic was like why capitalism is good, because there's this whole fucking witchcraft about capitalism that says like it's terrible and it's bad. And for some odd reason, capitalism seems to be linked with colonialism, and it's not the truth. Like people went out at a certain stage in history and they wanted gold at all costs, so they went global. And fortunately or unfortunately, Europe the UK was very successful in that. They had ships, they had the right infrastructure, and they went up and about. Yeah. They wanted spices, they wanted gold, they wanted resources, man. That's all it's about. And then they went out and they went about their systems. And now one of the case studies that they mentioned in the podcast was like you mentioned earlier, the caste system in India, where if you're in the lower caste and you're in the street caste, you die on the street caste. There's no way for you to move up. If you're in the middle class, you're in the middle class. And if you're in the higher echelons, you stay and die in the higher echelons, regardless of your output and how much you can give back, right? Capitalism is the single most thing, the only thing, and you mentioned this earlier, when Jordan Peterson says, like, capitalism is not perfect, right? But capitalism is the only thing and the only way we've known how to alleviate billions of people out of poverty. It's the only way how. Where socialism, not so much. And then people try to shit on capitalism. And if you look at it from a micro lens, like, okay, cool, fine, let's take capitalism out. They have this lens where, okay, before colonialism and capitalism, they tried to see the world in this perfect space where everyone did not have conflict. No one ever fought. No one ever had troubles with each other. No neighboring country ever had wars about resources. And it's absolute bullshit, because that is society in its finest form. If you take it back, and Dennis Prager used a very good example, is like, okay, I went to Papua New Guinea, and what's the successful way to get a lady? Well, you have a boar's tusks around your neck. The more tusks, the more successful you are, right? So their currency is tusks, because it's the lower. It's a more primitive society, and it's not derogatory about it. It's like, okay, that's a society standard. But as we evolve from being primitive and having tusks around our necks, it becomes kind of material in some ways, right? We want to strive for more material success. Why do we do that? Because we want to entice a certain level of lady. That's what people do. Men especially are susceptible to this. We want to be successful because we want to get a certain standard or a certain type of woman in our life, and we want to entice them, right? And the way we do it is through success. When we were hunter-gatherers, like he mentioned, in the Papua New Guinea example, we had tusks around our necks. And the more tusks means we're successful hunters, we can get shit done, and we have adequate amounts of meat, but also the tusks is a symbol of success in that community. Now, if you have to take it to its logical end conclusion, in a successful modern society, it's no longer tusks, because women don't appreciate tusks in a modern society, right? It's either my whiskey collection, it's my car collection, or it's whatever I've achieved later on in that paradigm. And that's my 5 cents on that. You guys can comment on it.
I just wanted to say about the irony is that feminists are often complaining about the hierarchical structure of capitalism, where men accumulate wealth and power and all of those things that are markers of success. And yet, we've seen very many articles come out where women are now complaining because they can't get boyfriends who have good jobs, who have their own apartments, who basically are able to be competitive in. So they bitch about that hierarchy, and yet they want a man who is competitive in that hierarchy because, like you say, they still want to be with someone who can provide. But again, this is I'm busy writing an article about a lot of what you're saying, Carter, for Free Market Foundation. So the article's about poking holes in, so this is the Peterson claim, poking holes in this idea that capitalism is imposing on humans this idea of arranging ourselves in hierarchical ways, that's not something that is natural to us. And this is again the tension between Rousseau and Hobbes, where Rousseau says, no, in our natural state, we're free, we're wonderful, everything's amazing, humans are lovely, and then society comes along and it imposes structures on us, and then we become these evil people. And Hobbes saying the opposite, nature is nasty, brutish, and short, and it's only through societies that we are set free to be able to flourish. And I like what Jordan Peterson says, where he's like, it's not one or the other, it's both. Society is both in some ways tyrannical, and in some ways it sets us free. And that's kind of the constant tension that needs to be straddled and needs to be continuously engaged with. And that's, I think, also why he has the views he has about capitalism as not perfect. It's there's always this tension built into it. But it's false to say that capitalism is the reason why we arrange ourselves hierarchically. We arrange ourselves hierarchically because, evolutionarily speaking, that's how we've developed. Now, it's not to say that there can't be bad hierarchies. There can be bad hierarchies, but there can also be good hierarchies. So the goal is then to try and figure out, how do we create a good hierarchy? And then the other claim I want to...
So Dino, sorry to interrupt and interject right there. It's like what Dennis Prager says in his argument is like, okay, cool. What was before that? What happened before capitalism in the 1600s? Because that's maybe the first instance we have of that. It's like, it wasn't perfect. People warred against the same things. People had the same issues. It's always a status thing. It's always a fight for resources. It's how we've always been. So you appeal to human nature in capitalism, because capitalism is a movement to the top, isn't it? Because you start up from the bottom, but at the least you can get to the top. If you have your shit together, you can get to the top, and you can make a few right decisions, and you can actually get there. Everyone has the same disposition where we start from zero, we stack up from zero, and we can get there. Everyone can get there. Just depending on the circumstance, where you are at that moment, depends. Like, maybe you have an advantage, that's fair, but you will get there. It's not exploitative in nature. It gives everyone from ground zero the opportunity to get there. It doesn't allow for a victim paradigm where you cry, okay, my labor is a victimhood thing. That does not apply, because it's not true. because you decide what your labor is per hour, and then you agree to it. Then you can't go back on that and say, okay, I'm being a victim right now, because you agreed to that agreement on that stage openly with your employer and said, okay, my labor is worth 250, 150 or 65 Rand per hour, right? I've got so many hours in a month, and then we sign the agreement and it's done. Unless you add something extraordinary to that, you can't fucking halfway go in and say, okay, cool. Now all of a sudden my labor is worth twice that amount. Like, okay, me as an employer, I'm going to ask, like, okay, what does that look like? You're doubling your fee as an employee. Why? Are you adding double the amount of value to my business or not, right? That's how it works. It's an open negotiation. And if you don't, then, well, you're still getting paid the same amount until you show me that you can add that amount of value.
So I have to disagree with you, though. I don't. So it's not that simple. Capitalism, it can be exploitative, and it does exploit. That's the whole point. That's why people complain about it. So there are negative consequences when you've got, for example, monopolies that develop, and it's not the case that you're never going to find exploitation. I've experienced it firsthand. There absolutely is exploitation, but so that's why when I was talking to Buddy Wells on one of my shows about inequality, his way of looking at capitalism is that people who are proponents of capitalism would like to think that capitalism is the system where everyone is basically on an equal footing. But he says, but that's not true, because your participation in the market is a function of your bargaining power, and your bargaining power is a function of your background and the extent to which you've been disadvantaged in the past. And I'll give you an example, a real life example of that, because so I recently wanted to hire a domestic worker, and so I live on the property of a landlord and landlady, and so they have a domestic worker. So I asked them, look, can I solicit her services, because I thought that would just be a very neat solution to this problem. So they said, no, that's cool. So I spoke to the woman, and I said to her, okay, so how much do you charge a day? She wouldn't answer the question. So she just kept saying, well, whatever you want to pay me. And I just said to her, well, look, it's not about what I want to pay you. It's about, like, how much do you normally get paid? Like, just use that as kind of a standard kind of,
okay,
measure.
so you ask her a standard market value, right?
Yes, that's sort of the norm. That's like the norm of what people get paid. And I thought she could just use, for example, what my landlady, what they pay her a day, and then I would match that. Or I would think to myself, okay, it's not something I can afford. But she wouldn't really answer the question. So I then eventually just went around her and I asked the landlady, okay, look, how much do you pay her? Because I didn't want to exploit her, but I also don't know how much is fair. So then she gave me an amount, and I basically then just matched that. But what stood out to me was the fact that she just wanted to be paid. So she wanted the job so badly that she wouldn't actually basically come to the table as a negotiator. She would basically just give you all the power and say, whatever you want to pay me. And I think that is a function of feeling like I'm so desperate for the work that I can't actually bargain for it. And I know in the industry I work in, I also know of a lot of people who feel that way, that they are in such a vulnerable position that they are not really players in the market in the way that other people are, because they can't afford to lose the job, because they know that they're not likely to find another one. So in that sense, the market is not. And look, I'm not saying that means we shouldn't be capitalist. I'm just saying that we have to also be realistic, especially if we want the left to in any way take us seriously or listen to the things we say. You can't pretend that those problems aren't there and sort of just go, well, capitalism is just this, like, again, this like sort of utopian idea. It's just amazing, because it is amazing. It's lifted millions and millions of people out of poverty, and that is amazing, but it still has flaws. And I think that And I know, and we disagree on the solution to those problems. Their solution to those problems is more regulation, more state control. And I don't agree with that solution, but I don't think that means we need to deny that there are problems. We just need to be able to think about the solutions in a different way.
So what I did is I got a very honest lady. She gave me 180 Rand. That's her fee. I'm like, fine, I'll take that fee, but you're in from 8 to 5. You don't get to walk out at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. You're there the whole day. If I'm paying you a 180, you are cleaning every fucking thing, and you're in from 8 to 5. And I expect certain things to be done in that time span, right? Because I also have to be realistic on, okay, today I'm her full-time employer. So I want X, Y, and Z done. And that's fair, right? So I'll pay a premium for her. But I also said, like, okay, in the next year, I might not give you a raise. But I'll give you, what I will do is, if you are employed for 12 months, I'll give you a 13th check for free. Like that's my benefit. Like, if you are honest, shit's not going missing, you are getting a 13th check, and I might even throw in a gift. But that's my prerogative, right? If you've done a perfect job for 12 months, and then I see you've done a good job, you've never done me in, I'll throw in maybe something extra. And that's me spoiling you, but it's not something that's included in the labor contract between us. It's just me saying thank you as an employer, right? Because I want you the next year. And that was my thing. I'm like, okay, cool. You want an extraordinary high amount for your labor, I'll give you that. But you have to give me something that's worth my while, right? And that's the power of capitalism. We negotiated. I said, right, 180 Rand a day. And then once a week you come in, and at the end of the year, I throw in.
Yeah, but that's exactly my point, is that it's not negotiation, because whatever you would have said, she would have agreed to. That's my point, is that when it comes to people being in a certain position where they're vulnerable, I'm telling you, it didn't matter what you said to her, she would have accepted it. So it's not negotiation, because she doesn't feel like she has any bargaining power.
No, she told the amount. I said yes. I didn't even fight back. I said cool. But this is my condition.
What if you lowballed it? If you said 150, which you've declined it. If someone is in a vulnerable state, they would accept it.
They absolutely. So you should, if you think that, you should taste the theory, and you should say to her, okay, I can't, because of, let's just say, because of COVID, I'm now in a worse financial position, so I can't pay you that much. I'll pay you this. I
wasn't.
No, I know, but I'm just saying, to taste what you're saying, you just give her this scenario, and I'm telling you, she would just go, fair okay, enough. Cool. And that's my point, and that's my point with capitalism. It's there are
but she still has the right to say no. I won't accept 115, and then there'll be a negotiation. Like let's say, let me be the devil's advocate and say I said 150. And then she said, like, no. I'm like, okay, 160. And then she'll say yes. I just said, okay, cool, 180. And then I expect you to come in at 8, and then you walk out at 5. But I expect these deliverables. You clean the cupboards, you clean, you do laundry, you iron, you do this. And we agreed on that. And that's fine, because we had
I know, but my point is she wouldn't have said that. That's my point, is that she would, every time you said to her, and that's why I'm saying the example of the domestic worker I tried to hire, she literally was like, whatever you want to give me. So right. I really felt like if I said 50 Rand, she would have been like, that's fine, because I need the money. That's not freedom, because that's the person being in such a vulnerable position.
What you are saying is the domestic worker doesn't have the agency or the knowledge to negotiate.
Exactly.
She doesn't have that
skill set. She doesn't have it. So it's not free. It's not an equal meeting of two agents. It's basically and I don't think, again, and this is again where I will never agree with the leftists, I don't think the solution to that is to say minimum wage. Because again, now what you're doing is you're shutting people out of the market so that people who would otherwise be able to at least make enough to eat now cannot, because they're not, and especially in a country like ours where we have such a massive part of the workforce that has, is like a labor force. I don't think that's the solution to this problem.
Fair enough.
But I don't think it serves us to deny that is actually a problem with capitalism.
Then how do we help the labor force actually to negotiate better? I think
they need skills development. So they have to be, because you want them to become agents. So you need for them to become more developed, and they need to develop the skills. And that's why it's a cliche, but it's true. Like in this country, given how poor the education system is, and I think by design it's that poor because it serves the government to keep the populace in such a vulnerable position all the time. You're not enabling them to become agents. You're keeping them sheep because that's what you want. So if we can't get to a point where we can figure out a solution to education in this country that is not state education, that is other forms of education, they will never become agents because they will never be equipped to have that ability to enter the market and say, I have other options and I'm not going to accept this.
Right. Like with what Dione just said right now, like I think if you remove the word agent and you put independent contractor, it makes a little bit more sense. Like if you commission someone for artwork and you say, I want a painting of myself.
So Kobus has independent contractors and he commissions paintings. Yes.
If you want to commission someone for artwork of a life-size picture of yourself, they will tell you their price, and you can either accept it or not. That's an independent contractor. If the domestic worker becomes the independent contractor, that ups the ante. This is my price. This is what I deliver. I don't work from 8 to 5, but I guarantee that. So this is also something that Carter, that I'm kind of like against. Like, you don't like to work from an office. You like the micromanagement shit. You're highly against it. But for the domestic worker, you want to keep them from 8 to 5 for a certain salary. That I think that's contradictory to the nature that you find yourself in. Like if you can give them a list of cleaning that they need to do or chores that they need to do and domestic work that they need to do, if they complete it before the time, the quality will increase and they have times to spare, and that time is theirs. Regardless, it doesn't have to be 8 to 5. If they can, if today I want you to come in and do X, Y, and Z, and they complete it in 5 hours, they can leave in 5 hours, the rest is theirs.
Right.
That would make them an independent contractor.
So I actually, Kobus, you're right, because I actually have a list. Every time she comes in, I'm like, I want this done.
Right.
You're 100% right. Then when she's done with that and I see it, she free 100%.
Right.
So you're actually right. It's not necessarily a time constraint thing.
Right.
Like if you finish that's 100%
in the realm
correct.
of an independent contractor.
Right.
So when you see them, there's also certain protections that protect the independent contractor. The two most obvious being they set their own price, and then the customer can either accept or reject it. So in the example that Dione gave, like she didn't set her price because she's a vulnerable state. So she didn't say that my price is 100 Rand a day or 200 Rand a day or whatever it is. She said whatever you want to pay me. Now that is not an independent contractor. That is someone that is desperate for work. There's a difference. And also they say like, give me the work and I will complete it on my time. It's not that I have to stay the whole day. That is not an independent contract.
Fair enough.
You know, so once you introduce it's not a contractual laborer, because there is certain pension, retirement fund, UIF that needs to be paid to a contracted labor. But if you're an independent contractor, you set the terms. You're free to negotiate the time, you're free to negotiate the price. But if you're not capable of doing it, you're open for exploitation, and that is the dangers of capitalism. So education,
And
I have to back Dione with this. Education is the way to go.
And I think there are two concepts here, though, that I think we don't actually delve into enough because of in terms of the debate around capitalism and socialism. And those two concepts are, when we're talking about capitalism, that's why I use the word agent, is because when we're talking about capitalism, the assumption there is that, like Carter was saying, we have two agents that are negotiating, and the idea of them being agents is that they can give consent, that they actually are informed enough that they know what they're saying when they give consent. So essentially, they knowingly do what they do.
Right.
It's not something that, and they're not coerced into it. So there's a free will question there, and there's this list of conditions that are in place to make it the case that you actually have a successful negotiation between two agents. And I think that in a lot of ways, the people in this country, they don't actually satisfy those conditions to be considered agents, so that we can say that they knowingly do what they do, and therefore that is consent, and therefore whatever happens, it's fair because they actually knew what they were signing up for. And then the second concept is
what is the age of consent in South Africa for let's just say for contractual work?
I think it's 16 because I think it's 16 because I know that
it used to be 16. I don't know if it's changed though.
The age for sexual consent is 16. I don't know about labor.
Yeah, I know that. Labor consent, I think it might be. The only reason I'm saying that is because I know that you can now get, if you've completed, it might actually, okay, if you completed grade 9, you can get a certificate that says you've basically now completed enough that you can like enter, I think you can become like an artisan or something. So you can essentially move. And it's ridiculous because I remember there being such an uproar about this happening in the country, where there was now the certificate you could get. But so yeah, I'm not sure, but I suppose 16, 18 around there. But again, like I say, I don't think again that the age question is answering the agency question. And with the majority of the populace being in this vulnerable state that they're in our country, where they're so underdeveloped in almost every sense, I don't believe that you can really say that they are full-fledged agents when they enter the market. And then the other concept is exploitation. So I think that it's a very difficult thing to get a handle on, right? Because I would say
the reason I brought up age is, let's say the age of consent is 16. Let's say for contractual work or arbitration, whatever you want to call it, like Arbeit, part-time work. A 16-year-old does not have the mental capacity to negotiate with a 40-year-old. They don't know the world well enough. So doubling down on the, like, both are not on the same, they're not on the same footing when it comes to business negotiation. So if the age of consent for working or labor is 16, it is still rife for exploitation.
Yes, 18, says Josie McFarland.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so 18. An 18-year-old is not in the space. When I was 18, I would work for $100. I was like, fuck yeah, I'll be a DJ, I'll be a barman. I'll come to your lesbian bachelorette party and shake my butt if you pay me. I did that.
You'll shake your gender neutral pussy for that amount.
I am a penis bearing human, and yeah, like you would do whatever for, like, there's a reason university students do shit for money, right? So there's a bunch. This makes sense what JC says now. I remember there was a time where there was 3 different ages, 16, 18, and 21. And then right about that, Casper de Vries had a comedy special, and it was called Mondag, and it was supposed to be celebrating his 21 years in comedy, but it got fucked up because the law changed to 18. Everything was made 18. The 21 age wasn't relevant anymore. So yeah, the 18 age, right. Mondag in Afrikaans became 18, not 21 anymore. But anyway, so you're not at the level to negotiate with someone that's been in business for 20 years. So if someone is 38 or 40 years old, they're going to exploit you, and that is the problem of capitalism.
Yeah. And the other problem, I think this notion of exploitation is also very slippery. So what I wanted to say is that, okay, so if we think of the domestic worker who literally would do the work for any amount, what I said to her was, well, I don't want to exploit you. And that didn't change her stance. She wasn't like, okay, this is what I said. She just wouldn't answer the question. So I went around her and then got the answer. But it's not so clear to me that it's easy to identify when someone's being exploited and when they're not, because I would say that even in my industry, a lot of the people that work in my industry get paid a lot less than they should be paid, and we all know it. It's not like we know that this is like at a lot of agencies you are actually being undervalued comparatively. And so then the question is, well, are we being exploited? Because, we could leave, right? I mean, we have that option open to us, but are we going to leave? No, we're not going to leave, because we know that at this time, it's also very, very difficult to get jobs. And it's a massive risk to take to basically either demand a bigger salary or to just walk away. But then are we being exploited? And now we're talking about people who are not even on the poverty line or in any way in such a disadvantaged position. But I would still say that in a lot of ways, even people that are on my level and a bit higher, we do not feel like we have the bargaining power to actually push for a salary that we think is actually in line with our skills. So now I'm like, well, then it's starting to feel like, well, then we can say almost anything is exploitation, because it's, you don't think that and again, I understand this idea that, well, the market's going to determine what you should be paid in some sense, like whatever your skills are valued, however your skills are valued in the market, that's what they're worth. But again, if you know of people who work in the exact same job that you do, and yet they earn much more than you do, clearly indicates that there are companies that are, and that always happens, there are companies that are trying to get employees at a much cheaper price, and they're basically waiting for people who are desperate, people who have no other option, who are in a situation where this is literally the only choice in front of them. And then the question is that exploitation?
That last sentence.
Okay,
sounded,
you finish, Kobus, then I'll give my 5 cents.
That last sentence sounded 100% like OnlyFans. People that are in a position, people that are in a position that has no other option, that is willing to that sounds like OnlyFans. Pay $10 a month. Fuck.
Okay.
But I'm not what did Harvey Weinstein do? Would you say that is exploitation? They got thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, even
millions. Not the fuck around.
All they had to do was spread the cheeks for Harvey Weinstein,
yeah.
Or massage him. I bet. So
I mean, in that case.
So I'll give my 5 cents. Sorry, just to segue. Where it's not so clear cut is, I want to use Dione as a fucking example. I mean, this is someone that's been in academia. She comes into because of the bullshit in academia, she shifts over to advertising and copywriting, right? And then all of a sudden you realize you write better. You've got a command of the English language that's much higher than your peers. So by default, you outperform the fuck out of them. But then the client comes and says, okay, cool. You've done this campaign. I'm not happy. Dumb it down a bit for the audience. And they're like, no, you shouldn't. And then the client is like, I insist. Right? So Dione gives this much better product, much more well written, and then the client says you know what? That's too intelligent for my customer base. You need to dumb it down 5 steps more. And then she does it. And then it's like, okay, here we go. I'm serving up shit platters to a consumer base Because if you are talking about high-end cameras or whatever the case might be in their product line or whatever customer they might need to satisfy, she knows by default these are higher. She's looking at the LSM level, right? It's a higher income type of person that's smarter than the rest. But then the client says, like, dumb it down. And ultimately, even if she's higher and smarter than most of people and she's written a better copyright than most people, now she has to dumb that shit down. The client is devaluating her by default by telling her, like, okay, we need to dumb this down so they understand it. It becomes very difficult and convoluted, right? Because they are physically devaluing you.
But it makes sense because the average consumer in South Africa is the one that voted for the ANC to get a free washing machine.
Yeah, but that's not our target market, right? So it depends on, and I just have a general distaste for this idea that we need to talk to people like they're idiots, because I think you actually, if you also shape the audience you want. It's like, it's a two-way street. It's not like when you ask more of people, they do more. So you can't just say, I'm going to meet them at their worst, the worst part of them, and then you're surprised that they end up showing you the worst part of them. It's because that's where you're meeting them. But this is a standard problem in our industry, is that we are supposed to be the experts. So we're supposed to be the people that tell you how to do your campaign. So then we create it, and then the client inevitably turns around and says, no, that's not what we want. That's wrong. Except they don't know what they're talking about. And inevitably we then cave. Because, again, we're in a position where we need the client, we need that income. And so that then also kind of, like, in terms of the nature of the work you do, it can be very demoralizing, because you're like, I'm actually showing up to work wanting to produce the best I can, but that's not what's wanted. That's not what is actually going to work, and it's not what, at the end of the day, I get more frustrated than anything else. And the result of that is you're going to start producing work that is not as good as it can be, because you're trying to essentially avoid that sort of having to redo something because the client has not decided. So
here, I have the same thing in education. Let me put the echo on this. Education. Like, we have the same thing. We have the same thing in education. Like,
absolutely.
you have to child-splain it.
Yeah.
Fuck it. If you're gonna dumb it down, they're gonna be dumb. You gotta
explain.
I love to mansplain it.
Yeah, you gotta mansplain it, not child-splain it. Fuck. So we have the same thing, and then they're like, no, but you gotta make it for kids. Well, kids will become whatever I tell them to. Like, as their teacher, if I lift them up, they will be elevated to this level.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
They will be elevated to that level. If I dumb it down, they're gonna stay there. So two things. One, mother of the child, do you want me to be their teacher or not? Luckily, I set my own price. The independent contractor thing falls highly on me. Do you want me to be their teacher? If the answer is yes, let's go to question number 2. Do you trust me to tell them how to study? If the answer is yes, fuck off. And let me teach your child. If the answer is no to any of those questions, then you do a better job. You do it. You take your child and you shape him the way you want to.
Yeah.
If you want me to be the teacher, let me do it my way.
Absolutely. And then we also have this in philosophy where we have to do history of philosophy topics with them. So they need to read the philosophy in the original text. And so the original English is very sophisticated because it's terminology they're not used to reading. So when I then ask them, so then we have to do, let's say, Hobbes or Descartes or whoever it is. So then they have to do these readings. So then they have to do these readings for class. But then when they come and I'm starting to go through it, I'm like, none of you motherfuckers have done the reading. So then I ask them, I'm like, okay, so who actually did the reading? And it's like 1 or 2 people put up their hands. I'm like, okay, guys, like, so why didn't you do the reading? And they're like, because the English is so difficult. I'm like, okay, but just look up the word. It's literally like you just type it into, in my day and age, it wasn't even that easy. I couldn't type it into Google. I had to look into a fucking dictionary and look up the fucking word.
I had the same thing. I had final year high school students. Final year high school students, we were reading Homer. We were reading and they're like, I do not understand what I'm reading. I'm like, but you're in this level. Like, you need to give me something to work with. Like, you need to at least, do the effort. You need to at least, if you don't know,
Yes.
write it out. Write your
Yes.
ideas. Take
Yes.
the words. We've been reading. Shit. Fuck. Now I just forgot the name of the Homer books. I've been teaching that for 3 months. What the
Odyssey, Iliad.
The Iliad. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We've been doing the Iliad for the past 3 months, and they're like, I don't understand what the fuck I'm reading. And I'm like, take what you think and write it down. So read the book and try to paraphrase it into your own words.
Yes.
Write it down, and then see, like, when you come to class, see how close you are. Like, I'll explain to you what Homer was saying, and you see how close your paraphrasing of that text is. And then, like, if you score 60%, if you're 60%, that's ballpark. You're fucking in it. You're in it.
Yes, absolutely.
And the next time you understand a bit more. And it's the same when we did Shakespeare. It's the same when we did the Stoics. Like, if you don't understand Marcus Aurelius, fucking paraphrase it. Write it down.
Yeah.
If you don't know what they're saying, no, like, if you don't know hedonism, like, paraphrase it for yourself. And when you come to class, let me explain it to you. And then you see how close you are. Are you ballpark or are you fucking all the way out? And
I agree with you. And I also would always say to students, if they find the English intimidating, firstly, fucking look up the words. You're not a fucking idiot. Secondly, like, make notes for yourself on the margin. So say, like, look, I don't understand what the sentence means. I don't understand what this idea is. Like, make notes. So when you come to class, you actually ask me and I actually go through it and I explain to you. But I don't know what you don't understand. You have to tell me what you don't understand. And they don't get that. They think I can read their minds. And I'm like, dude, just I had students, like, when I was teaching at UJ, I once had two students come to me in a consultation and say to me, this was now, like, I think 4 lectures in, and the course is only like 7 lectures long, right? So it's not a long course. 4 lectures in, and these are like 3-hour sessions each. 4 lectures in, they come to me and they're like, I don't understand. I'm like, okay, what don't you understand? I don't understand anything. I'm like, what? Like, no, I don't understand anything. I'm like, oh, okay. So I said to them, so you waited 4 lectures before you came to consult with me, and neither of you have ever asked me a question in the classroom. And then I said to them, guys, I can't explain everything to you. You have to tell me, what is it you don't understand? And they couldn't. And these are honest students. And I said to them, you know what? I can't help you. If you've reached, I say to them, you basically don't belong here then. Because if you are in honors and you still can't figure out what you don't understand and you can't formulate a fucking question, then you don't belong in honors. I don't know how you got here.
Right.
And then I kicked them out of my office.
Right. Okay, if you don't know where okay, this might be a little bit more difficult than Jean-Jacques and Hobbes. I like to call him Jean-Jacques because it sounds fancy. I don't want to call him Rousseau. I like to call him Jean-Jacques.
That's nice.
If you don't know if you don't know the difference between Jean-Jacques and Hobbes, it's a little bit more fucked up than not knowing the difference between Aristotle and Plato or Socrates. Like, there's a large overlaps between the ancients, but like, if you're in an honors philosophy class and you don't know where Hobbes ends and where Jean-Jacques starts critiquing him, like, you don't belong there. If you have a little bit of confusion between Aristotle and Plato, it's okay. Like, we can explain that. I can show the overlap. If you read the Republic, you're like, okay, fuck, he said this, and this is where Plato goes really deep into fucking the ethical human, or whatever you want to call it. Like, sure, I can explain that. But when critique is delivered, and it's the same thing with many of the educations, like, when critique is delivered, you should know if it's upon the subject and who the author is. So if you're looking at critique on, let's say, modern philosophy, and you look at who do we have?
Kant.
Yeah. Kant is always a good one to go on. I just like to say Kant for whatever reason.
All men do.
No, let's go Noam Chomsky. So if you want to look at foreign policy and international policy, and you look at how the international stage is set and how different political regimes can respond to the same crises or whatever, and you look at Noam Chomsky and you're like, okay, cool. So I take Chomsky, but I don't know exactly how Chomsky fits into the bigger stage. Well, we can explain to that. But if you look at someone that critiques Chomsky, you need to know where Chomsky ends and the critique starts. And that is kind of like where I'm saying, like, when you look at Rousseau, you need to know where Rousseau starts, where the critique on Hobbes, like what is not Hobbes and what is critique. And it's different. It's more difficult with the ancient philosophers because they complemented each other so well. They didn't critique each other to the extent where we have today. So if you want to look at something in the broader context, let's say communism. So what is communism and what is the critique on communism? And
that's exactly what the lecture's word was: history and philosophy of management. So I was going through communism, capitalism, socialism, all of that. But they at no point stopped me to say, and I was trying to basically give them the philosophical principles and background. And then what I did is I tried to relate it to actual examples and show them, okay, so if these principles are playing themselves out in the real world, what does that look like? So they can kind of see what the significance of those ideas are, that it's not just this theoretical exercise, it has real consequences for the world. But even that, they couldn't, when I was explaining the theory, they couldn't hone in on, like, let's say, when Marx is critiquing capitalism, they can't see what it is they don't understand. So I'll give an account of what Marx thinks, and then I'll give an account of why he's critical of capitalism and how the criticism works. But I'm sorry, if you're not going to put your hand up and say, ma'am, can you just explain that again?
Right. That's the biggest thing. Like when you look at capitalism, you have to look at capitalism theory. And then when you look at the criticism, you need to know where the criticism starts and where the actual theory stops. And if you don't know that, you don't belong in an honors class. You don't belong in a master's class. You don't belong in a PhD class. If you don't know where criticism starts. So if you look, if you study Nietzsche a little bit, it's a little bit difficult because Nietzsche had different phases. You had real blown, I am fucking hating the world Nietzsche. And you have like, okay, the world is okay Nietzsche. And so that's understandable if that's a little confusing. But if you're looking at someone that's directly critiquing someone else, you need to know where the critique starts. And if you don't, you do not belong there. You do not belong there. It's as simple.
But honestly, if you're in honors and you can't formulate a question, then I'm sorry, there is no hope for you. Like
exactly.
That is something that and I always I encourage them to say to me, look, I said to them, I will explain an idea 50 times in 50 different ways until you understand it. Like, I will never lose my patience because you don't understand an idea. So I said to them, honestly, if it's something incredibly basic, like last week I used a word and you still don't understand what this word means, ask me. I will explain it 1,000,000 times until you understand it. But they really just don't want to. That's what I realized in that course. They don't want to put the effort in. It was basically a course where they felt like they shouldn't have to do a lot of work. They couldn't see the relevance of it. These were business management students. And they basically were not willing to actually put effort. Well, you know what they did? They collectively did badly because they knew that the department would feel pressured to then bump the marks because they were all doing so poorly. And it happened.
I always tell my students, there's no such thing as a stupid question. There's only stupid people.
And not asking a question, that for me is the dumbest thing ever. Right. So you're sitting there and you don't know. And the worst thing is, I understand if you're shy and you don't want to ask me in front of the whole class, but that's why I have consultation hours. It's so that you can come ask me on your own or after the class is finished or whatever. So you don't feel that kind of like, feel shy and stuff. But they don't do that either. I'm like, so you guys really, you just hear.
You're so nice. You have consultation hours. I just tell them, if you don't ask it in class, then fuck you. Like either you ask it or you fucking don't. Like
Oh, that's good.
there's no privacy. Like your stupidity will be on display for everybody to see. Fuck consultation hours.
Well, then I'll. Sorry, I'm just throwing this in there. It's the hot log. It seems like you and Dione fundamentally. I wouldn't use the term disagree, but there's some fundamental differences in how you view ancient philosophy, right? Dione, I gave you the first snippet of Kobus, and then also him and I discussed it in the previous one where we talked about ancient philosophy. If you guys just want to, it's the last 15 minutes, so debate it, and then we'll probably set up a whole show about it because I would love that whole fucking chat to go on for an hour plus. So, Kobus, just give your first off kind of expression that we had in the first conversation about ancient philosophy, why you think it's not that relevant to modern life, and then we'll set up a second session for this, a complete, utterly full, nice and reloaded one.
I think that's where the misinterpretation comes in. Like, I didn't say that ancient philosophy is not relevant today. I said I would love to see the practical examples of how we can interpret ancient philosophy in a modern time. The reason for it, when they wrote it, the life they lived is vastly different from the life we live today. We lead a complete different life. We have different obstacles. We have different trials. We have different tribulations than they had. It doesn't make it irrelevant. It just makes it dated. And we need to bring it into the light. So the things that they touch on, to make the virtuous man. If you say, we need wisdom, we need the four, we ran through the four. So if you want to say we need those four, it's still, but it doesn't look the same. It doesn't look the same. So if you want to put a fancy title to it, like it's not the original Coca-Cola, like we have to adapt to today, because one of the things that we find necessary today is security of land, security of property. I want to know that I own my land and I'm safe to live on it. I want to be able to cultivate my own food. I want to be known as someone that can kind of take care of myself. I don't want to have dependence on the government. I want to be resilient mentally, physically, when it comes to adversity, when it comes to emotional trauma, or whatever it is. We can take some cues from the ancient philosophers. Now, the things they had to deal with is not the things that we have to deal with today. We don't have the EFF. They didn't have the EFF. They didn't have Joe Biden. They didn't have the communist agenda. They had different things they had to worry about and feel stressed about, and that they had to protect themselves from. It's not exactly the same that we have today. So to take their examples practically and apply it to today, that needs an adjustment. It needs a jump and an explanation. And that was my critique on the original episode.
Okay. So I guess I still disagree with you. And the reason I disagree with you is that, so a lot of what we're experiencing today, sure, it manifests itself in different ways. So essentially what I would say is the particulars are different, but the universals are the same. So fundamentally, you're still engaging. So this is the idea of the ancient philosophers is still being objectivists about morality. So they still think that fundamentally, the moral truths that they identify are not just for a particular time and place. They are universal. They will always apply because they've identified those moral truths as being universal in nature. But obviously, they acknowledge that the particulars are always going to shift, and that's why their ethical theory for me is so attractive, is because it's so different from utilitarianism and deontology, precisely because it doesn't see morality as this kind of decision-making procedure, and that's all. They see it as it's developing a specific psychological disposition that involves emotions, intuitions, and it's incredibly complicated. But they also think that the way you develop it is through action. So like actually engaging in those activities is how you develop those sensibilities. And then you also have to develop your reason to be able to decide what the right action is. And the fact that it still is as relevant now as it was then is illustrated by the fact that, for example, Aristotle's moral psychology and how he thinks one becomes morally habituated and morally developed, they are actually now proving, with scientific studies, they are proving that he was right. So there's a center called the Jubilee Center for Character and Virtue. And what they do is they actually have acquired psychologists, philosophers, and I think another kind of academic. But basically, they've actually done the studies to show that when we talk about something like temperance, which is essentially self-control, they've now shown that if you don't develop that virtue by a certain age, and also Peterson talks about this a lot, if you don't develop that virtue by a certain age, you will never develop it, or you'll develop it with great difficulty, and it will have serious consequences for your well-being in the future. And so in that regard, sure, maybe they didn't have the EFF, but they had tyrants. They had people who had these crazy political ideologies who were also trying to poison the masses and trying to basically, that's what the sophists also were, like trying to convince people of things that were attractive. So I think it's odd that you think that that makes such a massive difference, that it means that the ancients are not applicable. If anything, as time moves on, I think that they're even more applicable because of how they think about human development. And they are basically the starting point for the psychology that we have today. And again, because now they're actually trying to scientifically test what they were saying, and they're coming out of that saying it's true, they were right. And so now the center has come up with a whole host of programs that are essentially about developing people to become ethical people from school age. They want to implement these programs, and it's proving to be very successful because and I think that that's a fair point to make, that that's what we need now, because with the lack of moral development that comes through the church, that comes through communities, because God is dead and people are becoming atheists at a rapid rate. There is a lack of parents and communities stepping in to morally raise kids, and that's where this center is kind of seeing a gap and a demand for character education as such, and that's what their basis for it is ancient philosophy. So that's why I guess I just don't. So if you want actual, if you want that sort of that thread, there are a lot of books where they actually do. So I've got one that I'm going to use for our session on Stoics. And it's this really deep dive on Stoicism and all the practical exercises that they give you. And that's the starting point for cognitive behavioral therapy. And I've been in cognitive behavioral therapy. I went to a therapist who was trained in ancient philosophy, and he became a CBT therapist. And so, again, from my perspective, ancient philosophy has so many applications that are so important at this point in time. Even if you just think about the fact that, because the EFF is the way that it is, and the strategies that they're using, that is literally the sophist, that is rhetorical techniques, that's all that shit that you learn about through the ancient Greeks. And they actually talk about how you need to, so Aristotle, for example, in the Rhetoric and in the rest of his works, talk about how you need to actually manage those kinds of situations. And fundamentally, it's what we've been talking about. You can only get to a point where you have any sort of resistance to that sort of bullshit when you've developed people enough so that they have the agency to stand up to it and to understand what it is that's going on. But until we can do that, it's going to be very difficult to defeat groups like the ANC and the EFF. But yeah, so I just don't see it that way. I think that there's a lot of evidence to show that they're as applicable as they've always been.
I just wanted to add before Kobus replies to this, Kobus, also adding the program that you're trying to implement for young children to develop, because you actually have something in mind in that as well, and then give you a full-blown application to what Dione just said.
It feels like I it feels like I have to defend that I don't like the ancient philosophers, and I actually do. They're some of my favorites. It feels like I said something bad about them, and all I wanted was like practical examples of a modern era. I do value the examples, and I do value their advice. The only critique I have is like, how do we, or it's more of a question than a critique. How do we take that knowledge and that wisdom and apply it in a modern era? That would have been like, it was not like it's irrelevant. It's relevant more than ever. But how do we facelift it? How do we take what they said? Because what they worried about was not what we worry about. And so we have to adjust it we have to model it to a modern society. So for example, they didn't think about, we discussed abortions earlier. So they didn't necessarily discuss abortions, and they didn't discuss communism because it didn't quite exist yet, right? Communism versus capitalism, but we do. So how do we take the ancient principles and apply it to modern problems and use it as a solution? Because I do find value in it. I've been meditating on the meditations of Marcus Aurelius. I've been listening to his meditations and deep diving into my own thoughts. I've been using the Stoics to find relevance in my life, and it was more of a question of interest, not a dismissal as such. And it feels like I have to defend not supporting the ancient philosophy, which I actually do. I was just like looking for more practical examples of it. So answering some of the questions that you brought up, one of the things is like when you brought up religion, the more people becoming atheist or agnostic at a higher rate. One of the things that the ancient philosophers did not do was discard the belief in a higher being. They always, it was kind of strange, and now we have to kind of deal with it today. We have to deal with the fact that we cannot call onto a higher being of existence to say that you got to do it for a moral reason or an ethical reason because there is a God or a higher judgment. We have to make it more centralized and individual to say that your reason for doing good cannot necessarily be on a higher calling or a God, or it has to be more personal, more centered than just a God or whatever they want to call it, the Greek gods, or Jesus, or whatever they wanted to call it today. And people don't believe in that. So you cannot just, basically, I see that as a fallacy. I see it as a call to authority. I see it as so the ancient philosophers had that kind of dialed in, like, okay, so there is something they
No, they don't. It's not as clear cut as that. They don't. So it depends on, first of all, which philosophy you're talking about. And it depends on what you mean by that. So they all have the notion of divinity built into their theories, but the nature of that divinity is articulated in so many different ways. And the Epicureans don't have that. They're atomists, so they don't actually believe any of that. But so even if you're talking about the notion of divinity, it's not obvious that they're talking about a God. Yes, like Aristotle calls it the first mover, but it's not like the unmoved mover, but it's not like he's saying that it's necessarily a God in the way that we think now of the Christian God. And I don't think you have to even look at that. You can just go, okay, Aristotle says that because we have this capacity to reason, to live a flourishing life, we need to perfect that capacity, and that for him is moral virtue. And so you don't even have to turn to God to be able to see that what they're putting forward is a thesis, is a positive theory around moral development and what its purpose is and how it will contribute to your happiness, or happiness is not the best word,
right,
to a flourishing life.
Maybe I articulated this wrong. They had to take they had to We don't have to, in this age, we don't need to say that there is a God to make something for fear of death. We don't have to understand or articulate or acknowledge the existence of a higher being for fear of death. They had to. If they spoke against the existence of a higher being, that it wasn't there, that there was nothing, it was just people, they would have been prosecuted, either pagan or Christian or whatever followed. We don't have to do that today. We don't need to acknowledge anything higher than us.
Well, Epicurus didn't do that. And he wasn't.
The divinity. Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, all of them acknowledge the divinity.
Sure, but it's not okay. I think I'm missing the point of what you're saying. I don't know what that relates to. What's the point of what you're saying here?
Okay, we don't need to acknowledge that today, right? We don't need that. We don't need a call of the higher being to be moral. We don't need that to be ethical. We can just be within ourselves.
Okay, and what's the upshot of that? Why are you making that claim?
I'm making that claim because when they wrote it, that was on their mind. They had to take that into account for the theories they made. They had to make that. They had to take that in account. Like, if I discard this, I would not.
But why does that matter? Why does that matter to you? What's the upshot of this?
Because everything you have to take into account has an influence on the theory that you write down. Like, everything that influences you has an effect on the laws that you write down or the theories that you create. So if you have to include a higher being, it will shape. You don't have
to. I've given you a way.
We don't have to.
But I know, but I'm giving you a way in which you cannot think of divinity in the case of, let's say, Aristotle's argument for it to still work. And I'm saying, why does it matter? Are you saying that because they had to take divinity into account, their theories are not as applicable to our circumstances because we don't have to do that? Is that what you're saying?
No, because they had to. It didn't look necessarily what they wanted it to look like. They were so influenced.
So why does that matter? Why does that matter?
Okay, so if that was not an option to include the thought of a divinity, the thought or the idea of a higher being, if it was an option to exclude that, would everything they wrote still look the same?
Why does that matter?
Because you're using that and applying it to today. You're using those theories, and those theories are influenced by the surroundings. So if you look into the bigger context, like everything around them, their government, their emperor, the fact that they had to acknowledge a higher being influenced the theories they wrote.
But surely all that matters is whether if there's still a respect in which we can say it's true. And that's what I'm saying to you, is there is, because this is what the Center for Character Virtue does. They're actually scientifically testing those moral theories in the sense of the moral psychology and the development of people morally. And they're trying to figure out, is it the case that it leads to a more flourishing life, or individuals who live better lives, and that is what they're finding. So it's not clear to me that because of that, it must mean. And I actually don't. I think that is right. So maybe they wouldn't have written it exactly that way or thought of it that way if they didn't have to, in some sense, integrate a notion of divinity. Although given the central role it plays in a lot of what they're saying in terms of the explanatory, the causal relations, I don't believe that that's the case. But like, even if it was the case, even so, like now I lost the point I wanted to make. Fuck. Damn it. Shit, now it's gone. At the end of the day, though, I still think that it's not clear to me that here's the thing that I have a problem with. It feels like what you're asking for is something that no moral theory can ever give you, which is you want to know what would their moral answer be to certain questions. But That's not what they're about. They're not there to give you moral answers. They're there to tell you how do you. You said earlier, but they didn't have to. I want to know, like, if abortion comes up, if these issues come up, how would they handle those things?
No,
but they're not going to give you answers tomorrow.
I don't want to know their answer. That's our answers. We have the responsibility to answer it. They didn't have to. That's my whole argument.
Giving you. I know, but my argument is they're giving you an account of how you need to develop yourself, so that you can think of the answers yourself. So the whole point of their moral theory is to say, you develop yourself like this, and then anything that comes up in the future, you can figure out the answer to.
Right. I think we're arguing the same thing. I don't think we're in opposing things. I'm saying they gave the foundation, but they don't have the answers for everything. Like, there are certain things they couldn't answer, and we have to do it. We have to take the leap ourselves. We have to fill it in.
I know, but that's what philosophical conversations are about. I mean,
exactly.
How do you want what do you want them to give you that goes beyond them telling you this is how you should develop yourself?
I don't want them to do anything. I want us to do it. I want us to give the practical advice. I don't want them to do it. I say they lack it because they can't do it, because they didn't live in the same time we live in now. They lived in a different world.
I know, but I'm assuming that's why we have these podcasts and why that is what we're doing. This is us doing that.
Right, that's what I said. I'm excited for it. I want to hear the answers. I want to hear the practical advice. I want to hear, like, how do we adapt the ancients into the modern?
This is what I was thinking, is that I think that a lot of ancient philosophy, so if you think of Jung, so again, if you want to relate this to more practical, like, advice, so to speak.
Mr. Carl, yeah.
If you read, like, James Hollis is a really great Jungian analyst, and if you read Jung, I think that you see a lot of parallels between what Jung says about the soul and what the ancients say about the soul, especially this idea of the unknown or divinity as such. I think there's a lot of overlap between those concepts. And when Jung talks about intuition, I think, again, in ancient philosophy, the notion of intuition plays a really big role. And I think that if you start, like, looking for parallels, divinity, in my mind, is very closely linked to how Jung also thinks about divinity, and how we also think about the archetypes, and how the ancients, like, even Peterson talks about this. For example, the gods were representations of archetypes. So it's not that they necessarily thought these were actual, like, people living in the sky, but these were expressions of archetypes. And that's why they were useful, is because they played the psychological role in the culture and in the communities. So I think that if you're looking for practical things to come out of it, I think Jung is a step in that direction, where he's saying, if you take the soul seriously in this way, and then this is going to dictate to you how you behave. So here's one example of that, in which it's practical. It's like, should you avoid adversity at all costs? No, you shouldn't. Because adversity is the only way that you essentially face the shadow, you face the worst in yourself, you confront it, and that's the hero's journey as well. You have to face it, you have to overcome it, and that's the only way you can develop as a person to be able to face it better into the future, and to develop the confidence to continue to face the unknown. And for Plato and Aristotle, the divinity, the divine thing in you, is the thing that helps you overcome adversity, which is your rational capacity. And so it's only by developing the skill, and that's why I believe so strongly in philosophy. Again, if you want practical advice, my practical advice is philosophy should be taught from when kids are in school. Critical thinking is a cornerstone to being able to face the problems of this world. Most people have no idea what critical thinking is. It's become a buzzword. It's just another thing that people use to kind of, like, pretend that they're doing something about a problem when they're doing fuck all about it. And so in that respect, I think that, there's a lot of practical shit that can be taken out of it. But a lot of it starts with, and that's where we were talking about earlier, it starts with self-development and developing agents who can face these problems. We can't actually face any of these problems until we've created people who can actually competently do that. And until we do have that, I don't even know if we can have those conversations.
I agree with everything you said. I feel like what I said was misinterpreted. I just wanted some, like, Jordan Peterson had the 12 steps, right? So I was just, I feel like I have to defend something that I agree with. How is that possible? Okay, everything you said, I agree with. Everything you said, I agree with. Like, they, wait, wait. Everything you said, I agree with. There is things that the ancients wrote that they couldn't predict because the world has changed to a level. They have changed so much that they couldn't predict it, right? They couldn't predict cell phones and the internet and mass media, and they couldn't predict fake news.
Yeah.
Like, those are things they couldn't predict. So what I wanted to ask, my question was, how can we take the knowledge and the wisdom of the ancient philosophers and apply it to things like that, right? So there are certain practical examples that we can do, and there's and things that we can use, but it wasn't like it's the ancient philosophers are not relevant. It's like, how can we bring it into the light? How can we shine the light on the core philosophies and, like, rejuvenate it, like, bring it back?
I think maybe this is,
you're defending points that I agree with, and I'm like, fuck, should I oppose this but I agree with it. How should I argue this?
Well, maybe I think an interesting thing that they do talk about quite explicitly that maybe we should bring back into discourse, but it's just so unpopular, most people don't want to talk about it, is, how the ancients saw the perils of democracy and how they thought that democracy was literally one of the worst forms of government because it led to mob rule, essentially. And we live in an age where, you're not allowed to question whether democracy is a good way to govern. But I think that all the issues that they explicitly talk about in terms of the potential of democracy to lead to really horrible consequences, are things that we should bring back into the conversation and say, is democracy the best option, or is it, again, it's the best option of a bunch of really terrible options? Right. So we should still stick with it.
What can we take away about the ancients? What can we take about the ancient philosophers? Like, what can we take away 2,000 years ago? We can take away that independence is good, resilience is good, mentally and physically. You need to be kind of healthy. You need to be mentally okay to cope with loss, rejection. There's ways to work through it. The critique on the heroes, Achilles, like how much he overreacted to the death of his cousin, like that doesn't really fit in to the coping mechanism or the coping of a normal, what is the virtuous person? It's overreacting. It's leading yourself into emotion, right? So Achilles kind of fucked up there. So it's romanticized, like over dramatizing the loss of someone. So so all those things are cool. Like I agree 100% with it. Like, I just wanted to say, like, okay, so in the modern world, how do we do it? How do you take those stuff? And then let's take something like the fraudulent election in the United States. How do we apply that to that? How do we take the growing atheism globally and apply that to that? Like, you don't need a moral compass dictated by a god. You can do something virtuous by yourself. Or do we need a divinity? Like, do we need divine intervention? Or
I think engaging with the notion of divinity, and not, like in more in the Jungian sense, and not conceptualizing of it as the Christian God, is a very useful exercise, because I think it teaches you then to see how that can all play itself out in a way that's very different to what we're used to thinking of as divinity. And again, I'm going to turn to essentially the Jungian conception. But I also think, if you want my answer, I still think that fundamentally the conversations we need to have at this time, and I was listening to a show between Zizek and Cornel West, And Zizek was saying that, we've reached a point where most people think that philosophy is kind of irrelevant and it's dead. It's also been said a lot. And he says that no, like this is the point in time, given the complexity of the world, where we need to be able to think clearly and have these conversations more than ever. And I think that, but if you want that, then you have to develop people to be to a point where they can have those conversations. And in this country, and that's why, again, I come back to the character education. It's not just the character, it's the intellect, it's both things. And so if we want to have these conversations, we need people who are capable of having them. And so for me, the starting point of applying ancient wisdom is to focus on character development. And that's what my PhD thesis was basically. So I also agree it should be made relevant to the concerns of today. And in my opinion, the main concern is that we don't have people who are morally and intellectually developed. And so we need a character education movement. And it's already started, but it's not really developed in this country, for one. But it's started in the UK and in the States. And that needs to become the norm, where we are now actually developing people who can have these difficult conversations and come up with answers.
Right. Nothing you said, I disagree with. Like, we need to, earlier you said as well, we need to start that at a younger age. We need to teach philosophy at a younger age. I highly agree with that. You call it critical thinking, you call it rationale, you call it rational thinking.
Yeah.
Right. You can call it the Sherlock Holmes class if you want to.
Yeah, very cool.
We do need to apply that. I highly agree with that. And yeah, there's nothing that I oppose. I don't know why I feel like I have to defend it. I feel like I have to be the guy that fights the episode.
You don't. I understand what you're saying. You don't have to defend anything.
Fuck you, Connor, for setting me up as that. I just wanted to ask for practical advice while I'm listening to my meditations of Marcus Aurelius.
Remember, Kobus, the one thing you've told me that I really resonate with, it's something quite simple. And in one of your classes, one of the ladies that you taught said Trump is an arsehole. And you ask why, right? Remember this conversation?
Yeah.
And she couldn't give a concrete answer. And you dug deeper. And she's like, eventually the answer was because my dad said so.
Right.
Oh my God, wow.
It comes right back to critical thinking, right? If you have young children towing the line because their parents says something, we've got a fucking problem. We've got a huge problem. Because what it means is children are getting indoctrinated in the same way that Dione said earlier, like university students get indoctrinated en masse. But if we have households getting indoctrinated by their parents, we've got a fucking big problem, because they will believe. How you
say parents.
Parents.
Say it again.
Parents. Parents. It doesn't matter. But the problem is that where it stems from is exactly that, the parents give a certain narrative, and I'm sorry, I don't have a PhD in American like you fucking snobbish fuck. And like, import me for fucking 6 months and then I'll come back with my snobbish American accent. What I'm saying, parents. Doesn't matter. Well, it does, because we can have a fat laugh about it. But I mean, you had one child that told you a story, and you told me the story, and I like, wow, that's fucking bad. That's terrible.
Yeah.
Like, in a democracy, we don't need that. But that's what you get, right? If parents or however you want to pronounce it in an American fucking accent, it ends up badly for everyone, because that's the perception that's being shared. That's the problem, not necessarily my bad accent added, right? So
no, definitely.
Okay, we've got 5 minutes. Let's close this bitch off. I mean, we've been going for 2 hours and 18. Well, this is now 19 minutes. So Kobus, your closing comments, and then Dione, your closing.
Sure. Fuck. How do you sum up this? We need people that question the narrative that's pushed by parents and educators and the media, and we need them to think a little further than what's on the surface. And philosophy is a good start. Self understanding, psychology is good. I think if you sum it up into critical thinking, that's a term that we can be comfortable with, but call it whatever the fuck you want. Call it what you want. At least get kids to think for themselves, get them to question themselves. We have the capabilities of the internet. We're not bound to the classroom. We're not bound to the textbook. We have information vastly available outside the perspective of your teacher or your lecturer or your mother or your father or your parent. We can develop further, and we should embrace and encourage that. We live in the information age, but the fact that we reject views or opinions that's different from ours should be criminal. We should highlight views that are different from ours so that it engages the conversation and it takes it further. It helps us. Even if it's something you highly disagree with, it just helps you double down on why you believe what you believe. If you can explain it again and believe what you're explaining, that helps you. And if it changes your mind, then fuck, you've expanded and grown as a human. Don't shut down conversation. Engage it. Don't hate people that disagree with you. Engage them respectfully. Always be open. That's it. That's my final thought.
Yeah, to add to that, I also think, at the end of the day, there's an Ayn Rand quote where she says that you can choose to just basically, I can't remember the exact words, but basically you can choose to walk blindly, but you can't avoid the abyss that you're going to fall into as a consequence. So if you make the choice to not, like Kobus was saying, if you make the choice to not liberate yourself and to actually question authorities and narratives that are being pushed at you all the time, and if you refuse to learn how to think for yourself, that's a choice that you're making. And often you're making that choice because you lack courage, because you know that the world is actually a very big, scary thing, and it's very complicated, and it's very difficult to face that. And that's fine, and you can choose not to do that. But doesn't mean you're going to escape the consequences, because not doing that is still a choice. You're choosing not to become the best version of yourself, and the best version of yourself requires thinking, and it requires you to not to be sexist or anything, but to man up and face the world squarely, which is not easy. It's really not pleasant a lot of the time, but it's also the only way that you experience the best things that the world has to offer. And when I say that, I mean people who are authentic. So essentially, I mean, watch what happens if you try to become the best version of yourself, how many people still stand by your side, and you realize how many friends you really have. And so when you start stripping your life of all the inauthenticities that you've been clinging to because it makes you feel better and it makes you sleep at night, that's fine. But eventually you're going to run into some shit consequences. And for a lot of people, that's a midlife crisis or a point they reach in their lives where everything is just lacks meaning, and they go into this really crap nihilistic space. So if you want to avoid that, then you need to start as soon as you can to develop your mind and, educate yourself and just think for yourself, because no one can do that for you. No one can think for you. No one can make choices for you. And even when you think you're not making choices, you are making choices, and you will reap the consequences of that. So, yeah.
I like that.
I lost.
I like that.
Yeah, my last thought is I would love to have both of you back on. It's not necessary that you both disagree on the ideologies or the ideas that were set forth. It's just maybe the practicalities of them. And we can have a deeper conversation on those points. So yeah, I had a good conversation. I'm the unenlightened one. I'm not as well trained as both of you in philosophical matters, and I cannot say parents properly. So, and on that point, I'll just end it off and just saying like thanks for both of you like indulging me with this conversation, and we'll probably have many more on this point. And thanks for tuning in, everybody. Cheers and have a good evening.
Cheers. Oh, you just fucked off.
I think we're still live though. It's still going. He just turned his camera off. We're still live. We're still going. Yeah, it's.
You want to just tell him?
Yeah.
So what if both of us go off? What'll happen? It'll just like sit there live the whole time.
Yeah, probably just like a black screen. It was weird that I felt that I had to defend something that I agree with. That was kind of strange.
I think maybe it's just a misunderstanding in terms of what I took your comment to be, and so I think it was just a misunderstanding around that.
No, my comment was on the episode itself. Like I would have loved to have more practical examples. Like not the fact that the ancient philosophers are not practical.
What do you? So can you just can you just give me an example of what you're talking about when you say a practical example?
Right. So let's say you're locked down in COVID. Let's say you own a small restaurant and you're on lockdown and you're looking for a way to keep your head above water, to not succumb to depression or to lose your way, and you turn to the ancient philosophers. Like, what would you take away from Plato, Aristotle, or if you want to move into the Stoics and you know Marcus Aurelius, what would you take away from that, and how would you apply that to keep yourself, like, how would you keep yourself level-headed in current times? So what principles from the ancient philosophers, and how would you apply that in something like COVID restrictions, or how would you apply that in something as critical race theory or BEE in South Africa, or the EFF threatening your local store? Like, how would you take the ancient principles and then still, because for me, I can take it on a personal level to develop myself, to say that, okay, rationale is, you have to take your rational thought and you have to not be over emotional, but you also have to allow your emotions to surface, but don't exaggerate them.
But
so
I think I think this is where it's sort of, again, it's the sage or the person who's now practically wise. The skill they have is that any context you give them, so like in this case, the one you're mentioning, they would have to reason through that problem and say, okay, what should I do in this case, or how should I act? But that's obviously a process of prioritizing the values, so the moral virtues. So if you courage, justice, temperance. So how do you essentially balance all of those?
Right.
Which ones take priority? So maybe like it's a situation where maybe you're called upon to be generous. So would you say generosity is the overriding value in this case? And so it's hard for me to see how you can get that specific with your practical advice, because they give you examples to illustrate kind of, so like talking about, for example, the person who loses their son in battle, and Aristotle gives a number of examples in the Nicomachean Ethics of moral cases when he's trying to illustrate. But beyond that, it's going to be a matter of becoming a virtuous person, and then those dispositions being enacted. And that's with the extent to which ancient philosophy is considered unsatisfactory. because it doesn't give you like a decision-making procedure like Kant does with the categorical imperative, where it's basically plug any decision you want into the categorical imperative, and the categorical imperative will tell you the answer. But that's also why I think it's better, because how can you reduce morality to the categorical imperative, something like that? Because that's not morality. Morality is also feeling a certain way. It's also perceptive capacity. So you're picking up on like subtle features of a situation that are still morally relevant, but that are not it's not something you can just sort of rationally kind of access. So that's why there's an extent to which, yes, the ancient philosophers are going to say, I can't answer every question because there are too many instances. I could never tell you how to prioritize every moral truth. You're going to have to figure that out. And that's going to become a function of developing. And that's why I'm saying, like, I think the starting point is character education, because only once we've got morally and intellectually competent people will we see answers to these questions, because we actually first have to train them to be able to make those decisions. So all I can say is what we can do in the future episodes is we can pull from the text. I can literally go in and I can pull all the practical examples that they give, so that you can start seeing how would you go about sort of making a call. So that would maybe be a bit more helpful, but I'm not sure if it's going to satisfy your requirements.
No. Like, you did really well. And like, in a hypothetical, I would like you to build a scenario. That's actually,
okay.
It was not critique on the current episode. It was more of a wishful thinking for the future episode. So let's take that and build it into a hypothetical. So if we can do this, if Plateau was alive, how would he address Malema? Right.
Okay.
So we can create this hypothetical.
Okay.
So I think my critique was taken more serious than it was supposed to be, that it came across.
Okay.
Like, it was like, yeah, man, like, okay, so if I can really, really, really dumb it down or woke it up, like, how the fuck would Plateau react to Biden? How would Aristotle, it was kind of like a hypothetical thing, and I was like, I would like to see that, because it was building on it.
That would be cool. I actually wouldn't mind doing that exercise just for my own intellectual development. Like just going, let's take maybe you suggest a couple of moral
dilemmas
or situations, and then I'll go into the text. And I think it'll be nice to start with some of the examples they give. So when they're actually illustrating a point, then I give those, and then we sort of think about, okay, like, if we have a modern case like this one, then maybe how would this go? Yes, we know we're still alive. That's why we're still talking to each other.
Right. That was the whole critique of it. It was not like you lacked anything. It's like, I want to see this. Basically, I want to join this thought experiment, this think tank. I want to engage in this.
Then let's do that. Like, you.
Right. I really want to rumble on that. Like, I didn't set this like, the ancient philosophers have nothing to add. No, they do. Like, I just want to see how can we add it? Like, what is if we take a practical example of it, like if we say you cannot pay your mortgage today, and the welfare is, like, how the fuck do you take ancient philosophy and you apply that to that situation? Right. So if we take 10 situations that average humans find themselves in, unable to pay the bills, kids have to go to school, grown up, wearing masks, lockdown. If we take those, let's say 10 situations, and we plug that into ancient philosophy, what can we take from that? Like, what is the cake that we bake? Basically.
Yes.
So what would it look like? And that is actually what I asked CJ. So in future episodes, do that. I don't know
Cool.
what he shared with you and what he asked you, but that is kind of like what I was
No,
getting
man,
at.
he didn't paraphrase. He just shared the voice notes that you left. And I'm saying that I think I misunderstood what your point was, because I was thinking you were saying that in some sense ancient philosophy is still purely theoretical, and it's actually very practically minded in terms of even their considerations around metaphysics and logic is all for the purposes of action. It's not just for,
Right.
Whereas I think that's where, when you said modern philosophers, I thought you meant like from the time period, so early modern, but you actually meant contemporary. You meant contemporary. And that's where I think contemporary philosophy has lost its way, because I think contemporary philosophy is so specialized that it doesn't really engage important questions for the purposes of, okay, what relevance does this have for the problems we face today? And it's not because those problems aren't interesting, of course they are, but it starts to feel like mental masturbation, in my opinion. And that's kind of how I felt a lot when I was sitting in philosophy seminars, where at UCL, for example, we would sit and discuss papers, and and they would go on for like an hour and a half about like a footnote in a paper about like a logical connective. And I just reached a point where I was like, really, is this how I want to spend my time? Like, it just started feeling so kind of like, this is just people showing off.
Right. Let me ask you a more practical question though. So how do you apply it in your life? Like, how do you get something, like, what do you take to guide your development, your personal development?
So
what do you
I
use?
think so for me, the reason why I found philosophy so valuable, and ancient philosophy in particular, I had kind of an aha moment with ancient philosophy. I felt like I was in the right place at the right time, and everything guided me towards it. I know it sounds very but it did feel like that. I went through a lot of psychological. Hi CJ, we're still here. I went through a lot of psychological hardship when I moved to England. And it got very intense. And the reason is because I'm a very passionate and emotional person. So yes, I have this intellect, but I also am incredibly emotional. And when I got to England and I was now basically thrown into the deep end and I had to sink or swim, I found it very difficult to cope. And in the second year, I realized I wasn't coping. And I went to this, like I said, the CBT therapist, and he studied ancient philosophy. And at that time, I found this book, which is the one I put on Twitter, which is the Philosophy for Life in Other Dangerous Situations. And that's where Jules Evans also draws on ancient wisdom in relation to building things like resilience and essentially psychologically developing yourself to be able to handle adversity. So I found all of that just kind of came together at a time when I was still deciding what I wanted to specialize in philosophy. And when I went to see this therapist, we talked a lot about ancient philosophy because I was doing courses in it, and I'd kind of already decided this is what I was going to specialize in. And so the way I applied it was that I thought a lot about this idea of not suppressing your emotions, but using your reason to kind of put your emotions in perspective. And this was the thing for me. I hadn't confronted this yet. So this was my shadow. I had to think about the emotions I'm feeling seem out of proportion with what's happening. So there must be so these emotions must be indicative of something deeper that's going on. And they must be grounded in certain beliefs that I have, either about the world or about myself. And so that therapeutic process for me at the time was, and that's what essentially the therapy sessions were, it was about me saying how I was reacting to certain situations, and the therapist leading me through that and explaining to me how that reaction is grounded in a set of beliefs. And now I have to consider, are those beliefs true or are they false? And that process of, and it's not just again, it's not a once off, it's a habit you have to develop. And he even did this exercise, because I'm incredibly self-critical. He said to me, okay, you wear a rubber band. And then every time you think something negative about yourself, you snap that band. And after a while, you start realizing, holy shit, I think a lot of negative things about myself. And the whole point is you're trying to then train your mind to push away from those thoughts, because it's not serving you. It's basically all it's doing is you're literally just seeping in negative emotion, and it's really not helping you in your day-to-day life. And so I don't think CBT therapy goes deep enough. So that's why I'm drawn to Jung, because I think that, and that's why James Hollis is such a fantastic example. His books are incredible in that sense, because he goes so deep into what your shadow is, what the complexes are, and how it is they manifest in your day-to-day life. And the starting point is to be aware of what you're doing, because we all live, in some ways, we're also unconscious all the time. And that's also, for me, the ancient philosophy thing of becoming conscious, like saying to yourself, shit, like this is actually what's going on. Even if I don't know that this is what's happening, I've now become aware of it because I've gone through this process of reflection. And then the difficult part is to now start shifting the way you think. And like, for example, there are ways of doing that. Even if you, for example, let's say I am high in neuroticism. So what that means is that I'm much more likely to experience negative emotion, and I struggle to get myself out of those feelings. So one technique you can use to try and help yourself recover from that is to keep a journal where you essentially every day you write stuff that you're grateful for. So essentially you have to force your mind to think about things that are good in your life, so that you're pushing away from those negative emotions. And of course, at first, it's not going to like magically just be like, oh, I'm just happy now, like everything's amazing. But the whole point of it is that's why also the ancient philosophers, for me, it's the most intuitive way of thinking about it, because they believe in habit building, and they know that habits are incredibly powerful. And even if you rationally say you believe something, it doesn't mean you're going to act it out. You're going to act out a lot of other shit that you say you don't agree with, but you're still going to act it out. So that process of becoming conscious, for me, that's where I feel like ancient philosophy helped me a lot. And yeah.
Like the way that I see it is like ancient philosophy was still based in action. Like you had to do something.
Yeah.
And where the closer we get to today, it's more cognitive than it is physical. And like the further you move away from it, and then there's like a sweet spot, which is called, like, I would say, positive psychology. That's kind of like the basis between action and, you don't really have a responsibility, just cognitive. And then past that, everything just becomes cognitive. Like you don't really have to do anything. You just have to change the way you think. You just have to manipulate the way you interpret. You just have to adjust your perspective. But prior to that, everything was action. You had to do something. You had to get up in the morning. You had to go out. You had to exercise. You had to say nice things to people. You had to stop thinking bullshit to yourself. And then there was kind of like the intersection of the two. And I previously said this to Carter. Like when philosophy becomes practical, it becomes psychology. And I strongly believe that. So if you take positive psychology, that is latter philosophy. And if you take ancient philosophy, that is more, like you said, Jung, Maslow, Freud, like all of them, it's practical. What can you do with it? It's more practical psychology. Like you have to adapt your life and you have to change it. So when you have like a sweet spot between that, like I can think one thing and I can do another thing, I think that is where like you have cognitive behavioral psychology like actually coming into play. And that is basically what you went through. That's awesome. Like I don't know why I feel like I have to defend the opposite side. I don't want to play devil's advocate. I like everything you said. Like I
think it's good to play. I think it's good to play devil's advocate. But yeah, I mean, I think like what you're proposing is really cool. So yeah, we'll do that in a future episode. But I'm gonna go now, even though we're still live. So I don't know. This thing is just gonna sit here forever.
What this is. Yeah, Carter needs to end this. Have
I
a
don't
good
know
night.
why he came on and then he went off. I don't know what's going on. Okay. I'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, have a good night. Goodbye.
You too. Cheers.
Oh, this is just me. No, this is just my live show. What if you just choose not to snap the rubber band? What if you just choose not to be a human? What if you just choose to be an alien? Marika, you're a fucking genius.